Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 7 true stories from people trapped in cemeteries on Halloween, we step onto the wrong side of the gate. After the lock clicks, after the phone battery dies, after the fog eats the road back to town, these are first-hand accounts from people who learned the hard way that Halloween doesn't end at midnight. Some waited under dead lamps while footsteps circled the fence. Some watched lanterns burn inside sealed mausoleums, and some heard their names spoken from stones that shouldn't have known them. Every story you're about to hear comes from someone who was locked in, stranded or lured deeper, workers, mourners, and thrill-seekers who discovered that a cemetery on Halloween is a place that keeps its own hours and its own rules. My goal this month is to reach 3,000 subscribers. Nearly 90% of viewers listen and vanish without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Join the darkness. Subscribe now. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And if there's a graveyard in your town that truly unnerves you, especially one with gates that close themselves, type its name below. Because when the world is out partying and the masks come off, some things behind the iron bars still want company. Kill the lights, silence the world, take a slow breath, and let us begin. The bell rope twitched 3 times and the whole chapel let out a tired throat-clearing sound that didn't quite make it to a bell. The fog took the sound and swirled it around the headstones like it was sniffing for where to lay it down. The nameplate on the gate rattled, a little brass cluck, and I remember thinking it was the wind until I realized there wasn't any wind. Just a slow, misting drizzle under those humming sodium lamps. I pressed my glove to the wet metal and called out anyway. My name is Dana. I'm 34 and I was visiting my husband's grave at Hollow Creek Cemetery on Halloween night, when the old caretaker locked the gate and left me inside. It was supposed to be 20 minutes. I'd brought a little battery tea light and a sandwich bag of dried marigold petals because he used to make fun of my witchy offerings. I had a thermos of coffee. I parked on the shoulder by the gate and told the caretaker, Mr. Daly, fat-knuckled hands, denim jacket dark with rain, exactly which row. He nodded like he'd heard every story, every promise. Rules are rules, he said. 10 o'clock out. He was already swinging the big Yale lock when a minivan squealed up with a flurry of kids in skeleton pajamas, and he went to talk to them. I slipped in, said thank you, and trotted down the main road toward Section C. Hollow Creek isn't beautiful at night. It's municipal neat. The grass shaved flat, the stones mostly low and recent. There's a watch house by the gate, a brick rectangle with a small window. Then the chapel, then the caretaker shed tucked behind 2 cypresses. Farther in, the mausoleum sits like a cold storage unit with columns. No romance, just a place to keep the cremains and the old names. The drizzle made little crowns in puddles along the road, my breath came white, and the lamps hummed with that insect high pitch I only notice when I'm alone. The air smelled like wet leaves and something sharper, like vinegar and metal coming from near the chapel steps. I found Nate by the pin oak he hated because it dropped acorns on his car during services. The stone is simple. Nathaniel B. Cooper, 1988-2024. No quote. I wasn't ready for quotes. I set the marigolds in the tea light, wiped rain off the top, and tried to talk to him the way the counselor told me. You just missed the plumber, I said. He was late. I said, I got through today without crying until noon. The fog made the world small. I could hear leaves shifting, the distant hiss of the highway. The bell rope twitched again, 3 slow tugs, and the chapel corrected its earlier cough with a single low note that seemed embarrassed to exist. My phone showed 9:42. I told myself that gave me 15 minutes, maybe 20. I poured 2 inches of coffee into the thermos cap and held it in both hands. I tried, I'm mad you're not here, and felt ridiculous and relieved both. That's when I heard the motor by the gate and saw the headlights smear through the fog. A shape moved against the orange glow, then the tight clank of chain through iron, then the soft finality of a lock kissing its hasp. Hey, I shouted, too late to keep the panic out of my voice. Wait, my voice hit the fog and turned heavy. I left the thermos cap on the stone and half jogged, careful in the wet, down the asphalt toward the gate. I passed L. Arnett, a granite slab with a chipped corner, Miriam Cho, fresh lilies already browning at the edges, and Earl Whitcomb, the one with the porcelain photograph that always messes with me because he's smiling with tobacco yellow teeth. The gate loomed, 2 black wings pulled together, chain looped twice. The nameplate rattled when I reached it. Hollow Creek Cemetery, ES to 1878. The watch house was dark. The road beyond was deserted and slick. "Mr. Daly?" I yelled through the bars. "I'm still in here." The lights of a pickup bailed themselves into the fog and were gone. The drizzle ticked on my coat and soaked the ends of my scarf. I checked my phone, 1 bar, 6%. I thumbed Mr. Daly's number from the little business card he'd given me earlier. Caretaker, 9 to 10 p.m. on site. The call went to voicemail, the kind where you can tell a message storage is full. I texted him anyway, then called my sister. The phone died halfway through the ring. It did that thing where the screen tries to insist it's at 1% and then capitulates to black. I stood there breathing hard, holding a dead rectangle. "Okay," I said out loud. "Okay, Dana. The watch house might have a landline. The chapel might. There's a little door behind the altar. The caretaker shed probably had a phone or a radio. Even if there wasn't, there would be shelter. I could wait it out, knock on a neighbor's door at dawn." The fog thickened, pressed in. When I turned, something moved along the inside of the perimeter, parallel to the fence. Steps, not hesitant, not hurried, pacing. The gravel shoulder there is a band of crunch that runs under the iron fence like a warning strip. I heard that crunch, then a gap, then crunch again in a wide circle around the gate. I stood still because people do that, like standing makes you untouchable. "Hello?" I called. It could have been a deer. It could have been one of those teenagers who dare each other to run through cemeteries on Halloween. I called again. The steps paused. The nameplate rattled as if something brushed the bars lightly. The smell of vinegar and metal sharpened until it was behind my teeth. I went to the watch house because it was closest and tiny enough to see into all corners. The key panel by the door had tags hanging from nails. Sprinklers, East Gates, shed. One nail was empty with a brass outline where a key fob usually hung. On the desk was a ledger with neat blocky writing, rows of names and dates, and the hiccup of a double entry for October 31st. Klein, Miriam 2018, then again. Klein, Miriam, 2018, same ink, same hand. The last line read, "Final sweep, 2145, daily." Someone had drawn a thick underline and a dot, like a period with attitude. I said, "This is a joke," to the empty room. There was a Motorola radio and a charger base, the kind with a clipped wire on top. When I pressed the talk button, I got a static hiss and then a hollow, underwater voice. "Watch 2 to gate. Male. Slow." I said, "Hello, I'm locked in Hollow Creek, then. I'm at the watch house. Can anyone hear me?" The static crackled. For a second, I thought I heard someone humming under it. A low note, like someone testing the bottom of a song. The bell rope stuttered on its own outside and gave the chapel a little belly slap that stopped all the hairs on my arms. I grabbed the radio and the mag light from the rack. The flashlight made a ring of clean, dry light on the floor and turned the fog outside into a wall. I stepped out, clicked the watch house door shut behind me, and followed the road to the chapel. The steps up to it are stone, worn smooth. Underneath them, backed into a little recess, is the door to the storage crawl space. It's where they keep the folding chairs and extra programs, but I'd never seen it open. Tonight it was cracked an inch. The humming was clearer there, a single note that didn't come from my chest or ears but from the stone itself. It made my teeth hurt. I swept the mag light across the chapel and saw the bell rope twitch just as the beam crossed it, like something had yanked it and let go before I could catch it. The rope hung still, wet. I aimed at the steps. Water collected on the lip of the crawlspace door and dripped rhythmically onto the concrete. Plink, plink, plink. "Hello?" I said, and felt like a moron saying hello to a hole. The humming deepened and then stopped, as if listening. The footsteps at the gate started again, a long, slow circle, then paused, then continued, keeping time with my breath. I told myself I was hearing my own movements echo off the iron fence and come back wrong. I told myself an animal was running loops. I told myself I should get the key, any key, and be at the gate when Mr. Daly realized he'd left me. The caretaker's shed behind the cypresses had a deadbolt and a hasp. On nights when I'd come to sit with Nate until closing, I'd seen the door open with a wedge and a yellow glow inside. Louise, the grounds kid with the hoodie, would prop it and smoke clove cigarettes, leaving sweet clouds that didn't match his acne-scarred face or the way he said ma'am without irony. The shed was closed tonight. The deadbolt was a Yale, too. The window was dusty and webbed, but I could make out the pegboard and the shadow of a chainsaw. There was a smell like gasoline and oil under the sharper vinegar bite. I wiggled the knob, then tried the door with my shoulder because that's what people do even though it never works. The Motorola hissed in my pocket. I lifted it, thumbed the talk button. "Is anyone on this channel?" I asked. "I'm locked inside Hollow Creek." A voice answered, younger and tinny. "You're not supposed to be in there." Silence. "Rules are rules," it added, like a kid doing an impression. I swallowed. "Luis," I said, "if that's you, this isn't funny. I just need someone to come unlock the gate." "No Luis tonight," the voice said. "No anybody. Just you and Mr. Cooper's name etched on a slab." A cold ran up my spine so sharp I had to grit my teeth. "How do you know his name?" I asked stupidly. "I checked the ledger," the voice said, as if I should have known it had hands to do that. Then almost conversational, "Do you smell it? The metal? That's the key. That's how it comes through." I didn't know what that meant. I didn't want to. I went to the pegboard window and cupped my hands to see better. That's when the beam of my mag light caught the hook by the door. Hanging there against the raw wood was a brass key on a leather fob-tagged gate. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. The key was inside and I was outside, and the window had little squares of chicken wire embedded in the glass. "Break it," I told myself. "Find a rock. Find anything." The only things near me were graves and a rain-slick wooden pallet. I thought about trying to pry the window out with a broken bit of granite, then pictured the story. Widow vandalizes cemetery to rescue herself. "Hey!" I yelled, because it felt like it might change the weather of the moment. "Mr. Daly, anyone!" From the fog along the perimeter came the crunch circle again, closer as if the fence itself had learned to walk and was doing laps. My heart started a laboring knock in my throat. I pointed the mag light toward the sound and saw nothing but breath blooming white and then disappearing. Then a reflection, two low, steady points about knee-height moving together, pacing. I fixed the beam and said, "Dog," stupidly, like calling its name would conjure one. The points didn't blink like animal eyes. They weren't right. They were level with each other and held their place as the steps occurred, not moving with a head but sliding like markers. The radio hissed again. "You on the road?" the new voice asked, older, steady. I almost sobbed out a thank you. "Yes," I said. "I'm by the shed. Someone locked the gate. I think there's someone else on the property." "Stay calm," the man said. "Make your way to the chapel. I'm at the outer fence by the north turn. I can see your light." "Do you see mine?" Beyond the line of trees, a weak white swung, steadied, swung again. "I see you," I lied because relief felt so good that my honesty bent a little to make room for it. "I'm going to the chapel." "Do you have a key?" "I have the master," he said. "Meet me by the bell." The bell rope twitched as if on cue. 1, 2, 3, and the chapel gave a grunt of noise. I cut across the grass to save time. My boots squelched. Water stung my cheeks and slid into my collar. I passed Nina Petrov, plastic flowers stuck in hard clay, and a newer grave with the little sugar skull someone had left at the base bleeding its paint in the rain. The humming started under the chapel steps again when I reached them. The storage door under the stairs had grown an inch wider, a black grin. The key panel inside the watch house flashed across my memory, that empty brass outline. I lifted the mag light and saw the bell rope moving on its own as if the chapel was breathing. "Hey," I called because I needed to hear my own voice more than anyone else's. "I'm here," the older voice on the radio said. Good, friendly, like a neighbor. Between the chapel and the watch house, the fog broke slightly. I saw the gate again, the chain's wet glint, the empty road beyond. Something was standing just inside the fence, facing the bars, too tall for a person and too narrow, like a ladder leaning upright on its own legs. Then it changed, telescoped shorter, and the two knee-level points I'd seen earlier slid around it and resumed their pacing. I blinked and it was nothing again. My heart was beating so hard I felt it in my molars. "Come to the bell," the voice said insistently now. "Quickly. You have to be under it when it rings." "Do not go to the bell," the younger voice said. Not tinny this time, but right at my ear. So close I turned and shone the light into nothing. The radio in my hand stayed silent. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Luis?" "Not Luis," the young voice said. "Just someone who checks the ledger. The bell calls them. It pulls. The drip from the steps? That's how it drinks. Stay away." As if to prove its point, the crawl space door under the stairs sucked inward a fraction, as if the chapel had just inhaled. "I can get you out," the older voice said, steady, patient. Master Key, Dana, you want to see Nate tomorrow? Come to the bell. The way he said my husband's name made something locked inside me unlock. I don't think it was a good thing. I thought about the brass key behind the shed window. I thought about the vinegar metal smell that grew stronger near the chapel. I thought about the ledger entry for Miriam Klein. Entered twice like someone had tried to erase one, but it bled through. I went anyway. Because some part of me wanted to believe that a door would open if I did what doors expected. I stepped under the bell and took the rope in both hands. It was slick, the fibers swollen with rain. I'm here, I said into the radio. I'm under the bell. Good, the older voice said, satisfied. Hold tight. The younger voice said nothing. The hum under the steps climbed a note like pressure building. The rope moved under my hands, not pulled by me, but by something below. I let go, but it rose into my palms and dragged my arms up. I felt a tug in my shoulders like a child playing a mean game. The chapel's bell coughed, then rang a single long, low sound that seemed to come from the ground, not the tower. The sound pushed under my nails and behind my eyes. The world went white at the edges, and then the edges folded inward. I don't pass out, not really, but something like that happened. I found myself on my knees on the wet stone with the rope in my open hands and a bitter taste in my mouth. The bell let out one more reluctant tone, shorter, as if it had been interrupted. The smell of metal and vinegar was strong enough to make me swallow against my gag reflex. The radio lay several feet away, its orange light blinking. I could hear footsteps again, the circle at the fence, but now there was something else. A wet, intermittent breath under the steps. It sounded like the way my husband used to breathe when he was half asleep after a cold, a little snore on the inhale. I stood up too fast, and the world threatened to tilt me off it. The battery in the mag light had dropped to a low beam. The rope hung still. I stepped away from the chapel, rain prickling my scalp under my hood. I pointed the light at the crawl space and something reflected back at me. The reflection wasn't right. Too smooth, too round. But for a second it looked like an eye, black and oil slick, rolling to look at me. Then it was only a puddle, just a puddle. My heart made itself into a fist. Gate, I said to myself. Key. The shed, I sprinted, or tried to. I moved as fast as a person can move without trusting the ground. The steps at the perimeter matched my speed, quickening, then slowing when I slowed, not making any effort to hide. At the shed, I shone the weak light at the pegboard window again. The brass key on the leather fob hung just inside, almost touchable. I gave the window a tap with the butt of the flashlight. The embedded wire made it thud dully. I looked around for a tool and saw a rusting sign spike leaning against the wall. I grabbed it and jammed it under the window sash. The wood creaked, the sash moved a centimeter, then stopped. I pulled harder. The spike slipped and bit the side of my hand enough to sting. I swore and tasted rain. Dana. The older voice behind me, no longer on the radio. I turned, and for a second I saw a man in a hat standing by the road, shoulder wet in the sodium light, holding his own mag light low so the beam didn't blow out his night vision. He didn't look at me. He looked past me into the shed at the key. Can you open it? I asked, my voice too loud. Please, please. He lifted his hand like he meant to reach for me, but his fingers just hovered. His skin looked waterlogged. I can't leave the line, he said. And when I blinked, he wasn't there, just the pale plank of fog filled in where he'd been. The radio spat in my pocket. Do you see my light? The older voice asked from inside it. Perfectly calm, as if the man I'd thought I saw had been a trick of the sodium lamps. I'm at the north turn. Stop, the younger voice said, smaller, urgent, no longer pretending he had authority. Stop listening. They're outside the fence when the gates are open. That's why there's a lock. Once you ring the bell, they think they're welcome. They're not. They just keep walking. And if you let them in, if you hand them the key, they don't go through the gate. They go under. They go down. I stared at the key. I imagined how it would feel, cold and heavy in my hand. I imagined hearing the click of the lock, the swing of iron, the air changing as a way appeared. Somewhere, across stone and wet grass, something clicked its teeth together in a way that made me think of horseshoes. The pegboard creaked. The window had lost another millimeter of stubbornness. I'm opening it, I said to myself, to whatever was listening. I levered the spike again. The sash moved. The embedded wire protested with a little twang. The reflection of my face in the glass looked like someone else's. Longer, older, eyes too dark. I shoved. The window gave a little. I slid my arm in up to the elbow, reaching. My sleeve soaked on the sill. My fingers brushed leather. 3 slow tugs on the bell rope. The chapel rang once, and everything under my arm went not just cold but absent, like my skin had been turned off. The leather shifted as if someone inside the shed had pushed the key away from me. I swore and strained. I could feel the slit of the fob, feel the weight of brass. I hooked a finger and lifted, and something in the shed exhaled in a way that made the hair at the back of my neck move. I pulled my arm out fast enough to scrape my wrist. The key swung toward me and then caught on the hook, dangling inches out of reach. "Hold the bottom of the sash," the older voice said from the radio, which now sounded like it was at the base of the bell, not in my pocket. "Use your shoulder." I did both and got nowhere. I stepped back, gasping, and the perimeter steps sped up like whoever or whatever it was got excited when I gave up. The vinegar metal smell was a slap now. My mouth filled with it, my nose filled with it, and for a second I thought I could taste pennies. I pressed my back to the shed, face tipped up into the drizzle, and I started to laugh because the situation has to twist sideways somehow, or you drown in it. That's when a person coughed near my left shoulder. I flinched and turned, and there was a woman in a yellow rain poncho, hair plastered to her skull, mascara in ropes at the edges of her eyes. "Are you locked in too?" she asked. "I'm trying to find my husband. He's new." "Section C, Mrs. Klein," I said because the name fell out of me without my permission. She didn't answer. She kept her head tipped just a little to one side, listening. "My name's Miriam," she said, as if the effort to keep her voice on this side of flat was too much. "I think I missed closing." "You and me both," I said. Do you see anything unusual?" Even as I asked it, I wanted to reel it back in. She tilted farther, straining, then turned her head incrementally like someone who'd never had to coordinate the motion before and was trying it on. "I hear him," she said, not to me. "3 pulls," she murmured, distracted. She looked toward the chapel. The bell rope twitched once as if in answer. "He does that when he wants me home." She started walking. I grabbed her arm. Her plastic sleeve slid under my fingers and made a sticky sound. Her skin was either very hot or I was very cold. "Don't," I said. "Please." She blinked slowly as if extracting herself from underwater. "The gate," she said, pointing vaguely, and I followed her finger and saw the chain. The maglight's beam hit it and glinted. Past the bars, a new light moved, steady, white. The first honest-looking light I'd seen. I went to the fence and cupped my hands around my mouth. "Hello?" The beam paused, then swept toward me and stopped at my face. I threw my arm over my eyes. "Ma'am," a voice called, crisp, close enough to feel like a cool towel on my forehead. "You in there?" "You all right?" A silhouette, squared shoulders, the brim of a hat. "Yes," I yelled, louder than I meant to. "Can you open it?" "The gate's chained. Where's the caretaker?" the voice asked. I could see now that it belonged to a police officer. A woman, her light steady where mine shook. "Name's Han," she added, almost apologetically, as if names mattered. "Hang on, let me call it in." "He locked up," I said. "I was visiting my husband. He left before I realized." I sounded drunk on rain. "There's a key in the shed," I added, giddy with the thought that a person on the other side of the bars existed. "Inside, brass key. I can almost reach it." "Stay put," Officer Han said. Her beam dropped to the lock. "We'll get you out." "Step back from the gate for me." She spoke into her radio. I caught fragments. Inside, locked, hollow creak, bolt cutters. Every normal word felt like a ladder slipped into a well. Behind me, the footsteps at the perimeter stopped walking their circle and came toward me on a straight line. I didn't want to turn and see. Miriam in the yellow poncho had drifted toward the chapel like a moth. "Mrs. Klein," I said, but softly now, as if the name was a spell I should be careful with. She took the rope, and this time when it twitched, it didn't look like it had resisted her. She pulled once, twice, 3 times. The bell answered with that deep, ground-up note. The door under the steps opened wider, not swung by a hinge, but widened like a mouth. "Ma'am, step away from that rope," Officer Han said, projecting her voice into the fog. "You there in the yellow, hello?" Her beam swung and died against the wall of gray. "Don't do that," the younger voice whispered in my ear. "He'll drink. He always does." "I have to get out," I whispered back, not sure if I was talking to the voice or to myself or to Nate. The maglight buzzed, a tired insect, and then went dark. The world squeezed. A second later it flicked back to life in a strangled ring, and one of the 2 knee-height points by the fence surfaced in the new light. It wasn't a point at all. It was a smooth blank brass oculus where a screw should have been on the square of the gate's lockbox, polished by years of hands. The screw was missing. The hole was an eye without an iris, an invitation. "Han!" I yelled, heart thundering. "There's a missing screw here on the inside of the lockbox. If I can line it up, you can slip the chain, maybe." Her light steadied on me. "Okay," she said, calm, ready to be instructed by the person in the trap. "Okay, I see. Hold on." She moved her beam to the hinge and I saw that the pin had been backed out halfway, maybe months ago, maybe tonight. I don't know why Mr. Daly would do that. I don't know why anyone would. "I'm going to the shed," I said, decision arriving like a click. "There's a key. If I can get it, we don't have to mess with the screw." I started to move and stopped because something had stepped between me and the road. Between me and Han's voice, not blocking me but insinuating itself, so that to go forward I would have to brush it. I could feel pressure on the air like standing too close to a bus when it arrives. "Stay back," Han said, like she could see pressure. "Just stay with me." "Put your hand under the steps," the older radio voice coaxed from the bell's base, patient as a doctor. "Just for a second. That's where the spare is." I took 2 steps toward the chapel because I could not help it. The humming under the steps had a suggestion in it that sounded like Nate's name without the consonants. A vowel sound I'd heard him make once when he'd been asleep and dreaming he was falling. I crouched. The opening had widened enough that I could put my arm in up to the shoulder without scraping. The air down there wasn't air. It was cool and slick, like the surface of a fish. I put my palm on the stone and felt nothing until I felt something cold slide along the pads of my fingers, searching. I yanked my hand back so fast I left skin. The bell rope jerked in irritation and slapped the side of the chapel with a wet sound. "Ms. Cooper," Han said, voice firm, moving now. "Back to the gate. I've got my partner coming with cutters. You hear me? Back to the gate." Her light bobbed, then steadied, then bobbed again as if she were navigating the ditch on the other side of the road. I backed away from the chapel, from the steps, from Miriam who stood with the rope in her hand, head tilted to listen to something I could not. The perimeter footsteps resumed their circle, slower now, satisfied with the function they served. The vinegar metal smell thinned with distance. I reached the gate and put both hands through the bars like a child. Officer Han's face was a calm moon 2 feet away, the chain wet and black between us. "You're okay," she said. And she made it not a question. "You're doing good." I rang the bell, I said stupidly, like a confession. I shouldn't have. She watched me without the reflexive comfort people deploy. "No," she said. "You shouldn't have." Then she smiled a tiny smile to show she wasn't scolding me. "But you stopped. That matters." She hit her shoulder mic. 2 minutes out, she told someone. "Hold tight." The radio in my pocket crackled. The younger voice sighed with relief or fatigue. "Morning's nice," he said to me soft. "They lose interest. They go back to the perimeter and walk laps. The lock drinks light instead of hands." "It's better. Who are you?" I asked, too late. The hiss returned. The bell rope drifted against the wall and fell still. Miriam's poncho glowed faintly in the lamplight and then faded like a highlighter washed away by rain. I couldn't tell if she'd stepped back under the steps or walked away into fog or never been there at all. The cutters arrived with a grunt and a flash of orange handle. One crunched, too. The chain loosened like a muscle, unclenching. The gate swung 6 inches and stopped, briefly stubborn, then moved again when Han leaned her shoulder into it, and I tugged from inside. "Stay with me," she said, and I did like I'd been waiting for that sentence all night. I slipped out into the smell of wet asphalt. The world on that side looked flatter, which was almost disappointing. "Paramedics are on the way," Han said, automatic courtesy. "You're soaked through." She looked past me into the cemetery. "Anyone else inside?" Before I could say Miriam, she parted her lips in a not smile. "Thought I saw someone by the chapel." "Yellow," she said, and let the word hang. "You know them?" "No," I said, the easiest lie I've ever told. "Just me." Mr. Daly came maybe 20 minutes later, breath clouding, hair stuck up on one side like he'd been sleeping in a chair. "Lord save us," he said, seeing the chain on the ground, the gate open, the look on my face. "Rules are rules," he said to no one, and then to me. "You okay?" His eyes went to the chapel and then away from it too quick. He kept his hands jammed in his jacket pockets like he was worried they might know what to do if he let them loose. I signed something with a shaky pen. I told Han I could drive the 3 blocks to my sister's if she'd follow me, and she said she would for the first 2. "I'll be yelling at you at the first red light to pull into the station," she said, not joking. Her voice made me feel all right in a way I hadn't expected to feel again. I told her about the key in the shed and she nodded without writing it down, as if that had happened last week already, and she'd noted it then. "We'll check it," she said. "We'll make sure the spare is where it should be." I went back 2 days later because grief and curiosity share the same engine. I brought fresh marigolds and another tea light. It was daytime and the fog was honest haze and the lamps were off. The nameplate on the gate looked ordinary. When I paused by the watch house to see if Mr. Daly was in, I saw the ledger open on the desk. There was a line through October 31st, a stroke so heavy it had torn the page, and a new line underneath, "Klein Miriam, 2018, departed 2207. The word departed looked like it had been written twice, the first time too light to stick. I walked to section C and set the flowers. The ground was damp but solid. The chapel steps were just steps. The storage crawlspace door was shut tight, a new hasp screwed in bright and raw. The bell rope hung limp, stiff with dried rain. I stood there listening and there was only the wind, honest and plain, the kind that moves leaves against each other in conversation. I told Nate I was fine. I told him I'd get through the week. On my way out, I stopped at the shed and peered through the window. The pegboard was clean. The chainsaw hung in its spot. The brass key was gone from the hook. For a second, I saw it overlaid on the wood, an outline polished bright by years of fingers, the way a missing picture leaves a rectangle on a wall. Then a shadow crossed behind me, and the glass reflected only my face. The vinegar metal smell rose briefly and passed, as if someone had opened a locker and then shut it. At the gate, Mr. Daly lifted a hand in a little salute. "Be careful at night," he said, which is something you say to someone in a parking lot, not to someone walking between the names. "We got kids jumping fences. Halloween hangs around too long." "I won't," I said. "Good," he said, and updated the ledger with his fat-knuckled hand. When he lifted the pen, the gate's nameplate gave a small dry rattle in a wind I couldn't feel. On my way to the car, I heard, or thought I heard, 3 slow, tired tugs on the bell rope, each one softer than the last, like someone reminding me of a rule we were both trying to keep. The first sound was metal against stone, a little tapping clink like a nameplate shivering on its screws. Then something heavier exhaled beneath the path, the way saturated soil sighs when it sinks. I had one hand on the camera and the other on the cold rail of the chapel steps, and I watched the bell rope in the watch house move once and stop. It moved again after a breath and again after another, 3 slow tugs that didn't make a sound from the belfry at all. I'm a freelance photographer, 31, the kind who sneaks into places for atmospherics, and that night I had broken into Highgate Cemetery for Halloween, because a friend dared me to get statues at midnight. The drizzle wasn't a proper rain, more a mist the sodium lamps turned into golden dust. It made the angels look soft around the edges, blurred, like their marble shoulders were giving off warmth. I'd paced myself up from Swain's Lane, hugging the perimeter where the wall's old bricks wept, and slipped in through the service gate when some late traffic drowned the snap of my clip. The plan was simple: 30 minutes the big boulevard of the West Cemetery, a few frames in Egyptian Avenue, and, if I was lucky, a long exposure of the Circle of Lebanon. In a backpack I had my old mag light, a thermos of coffee, and a lighter in case I needed to warm my fingers, though it left burn marks on my jeans and I never learned. I had no business here, and I knew that in the way your shoulders hunch when you expect the tap of a guard's torch on your spine. Lila was the one who pushed me. She has this habit where she chews gum like each piece owes her money and says things twice when she's excited. Do it, she texted. Midnight at Highgate. I'll buy the ramen after. I told her no twice and then sent her a map with a dot on it anyway. She gave me names of people who had done night shoots there in the 70s and slipped in parentheses that she once kissed someone on Egyptian Avenue who could hold a handstand for a full minute. If I'm honest, I wanted the click sound of the shutter in a place that didn't care about clicks. The first anomaly wasn't even mine. A maintenance clipboard sat on a chair in the little watch house by the gate road, a page pulled forward by the weather so it curled like a fingernail. The column for Southgate Locked had both yes and yes ticked by the same hand at 22, and again at 22:10, and the space for initials was filled with the same initials twice, neat as a stamp. MH. Under a key hook was a single brass key on a leather loop with a metal tag that said Watch H. It looked used. The loop was dark with oil from a thumb. I didn't touch anything at first, but the drizzle had found its way down my collar, and the thought of having the key that could make leaving quick slid into my head so quietly. It felt like I'd always meant to take it. I took it and it was heavy in my pocket like a small book. On my way up the slope, I passed a headstone with a lamb, and the inscription was worn, but the date was sharp. All the stones blur together until they don't, like faces on a crowded platform. And that one didn't because the date was today's date in 1899. I took a picture for the oddness of it, and my flash bounced and made the lamb glow against the black ivy. 3 plots later, another stone had the same date, different year. I told myself it was just that lots of people die on Halloween, and that I was noticing what I wanted to notice. I timed my breathing with my steps, 3 in, 3 out, then stopped doing that because the bell rope flicked again, somewhere behind me, and I knew I was counting for it. The statues didn't move like movies. They didn't move at all when I watched them, but they looked wrong each time I looked up, as if they had negotiated with the night while I wasn't looking and agreed to a slightly different expression. An angel with a draped robe who had been looking left when I set my tripod tipped its chin down the second time I glanced. I thought it was me, the angle from where I stood, and then on a path lined with closed vaults, a stone dog pointed toward the north when I returned from a long exposure, and I could have sworn his snout had pointed at the middle. I tried to catch it in the camera, like a magician trying to catch his own sleight of hand, but stills are no good at catching drifting. I kept thinking of Mr. Hobbs. Eileen had told me about him when she still worked at the council office and smelled like jasmine tea because she kept the bags in her coat. "He's the one with the cap," she said. "Nicotine fingers. He says mind the stones like it's one word." Later, in the watch house, I would find his name on the log, the MH that signed both locks. But in this earlier moment, it was only a rumor made of someone else's breath. I told myself if he came, I'd flash the press card from a paper that hadn't run my work in months and apologize hard enough to make my voice shake. By Egyptian Avenue, the drizzle turned to a meaner spit that tapped on the laurel leaves overhead. The avenue is narrow and dark, and the family vaults are tight together like train compartments. The stone is green in places where everything drips, and the air chills your teeth because it's been under there too long. I shot a frame from low, kneeling on damp gravel, and got up with grit sticking to my jeans. The maglite switch felt gummy when I clicked it on, like someone had taped over it and then peeled the tape off. The beam hit the curve of a door ring and made it gleam like an eye. Behind me, further down the passage, came a faint humming that I thought was a fridge at first. It wasn't mechanical, though. It was more like a person trying not to hum but failing. The sound caught behind their lips. "Hello," I said without turning around, because you don't want to shine a light into someone's face if they're actually there and mean you no harm. The humming stopped. I pivoted the light down the corridor and it jumped at the angles like a fish. Vault doors, locks, moisture, no one. For a second I thought of Trevor, with his coat that always smelled like wet wool, saying in a half-told story that sometimes people sleep in there during the day and move in the night. I told the idea to go away and it didn't. When I stepped out near the circle of Lebanon, the cemetery breathed bigger. High trees ringed the catacombs and the earth had a way of sounding hollow underfoot. I set the tripod again and ate a mouthful of bitter coffee from the thermos. One of the columbarium niches in the curved wall had a cracked pane, and the little flower inside had fallen down and dried on its side. I took a shot and looked up, and this time I saw the change. The main angel on the central path, the one who holds a folded palm against her ribs, didn't just look different, she pointed. Her finger was angled toward the watch house, and I knew that was impossible because stone is stone. The drizzle had strengthened for a minute, but when I blinked it was soft again, and the lamps buzzed in their own yellow sea. I told myself to go. The brass key in my pocket had warmed to my thigh and I wanted it on a hook again. The pathway down was slick. Leaves had made a mush that squeaked under boots. Halfway to the watch house I saw a man under a lamp with a cap pulled low. He had the posture of someone who lived in his shoulders. He flicked a cigarette and the ember arced to the path. I saw the nicotine yellow along his first and second fingers and knew I'd found Mr. Hobbs. He didn't look surprised to see me. He had a Motorola clip to his jacket and the kind of flashlight that says authority when you look into it. "You're late," he said. He said it like we had an arrangement. His voice had a sandpaper scrape. "Mind the stones." "I'll get out of your way," I said. "I'm leaving." "You were meant to have the map," he said, as if I'd let him down. "We logged the lot when we let you in. Mind the stones." "I didn't come in with anyone," I said. I felt both relieved and worried. If he thought he had admitted me, perhaps I wasn't trouble. If he was saying things that weren't true, perhaps he wasn't alone. He looked at my pocket where the bulge of the key made a print. "Put that back for me," he said. Not a question. "Watch house is this way." He turned and walked without checking. I followed, which meant he knew I would, and I did. I told myself to hand over the key and a smile and then get out, and that the humming had been water in pipes. As we moved, he told me about the statue that points. He said the old masons always give them an angle, so rain doesn't pool and crack the elbow. "They point for the water," he said. "Everything points for the water." In the watch house, the soda machine hummed, old enough to be called a pop machine, with buttons that no longer matched the stock. It made the same not-quite tune I'd heard down in the avenue. The clipboard page still curled and the same initials sat next to both locks. Mr. Hobbs reached up to the key hook and tapped the empty space where I knew the key should hang. "Put it back now," he said. He looked at my hands when I did it. He didn't say thanks. "You sign." He slid the clipboard over and his thumb left a gray smudge on the edge. Lila called then. The name lit my phone screen like the room had blinked. "You alive?" she said without a question mark. Chewing, I could hear through the cheap microphone. "You in there? You getting it?" "I'm signing a thing," I said, and that was ridiculous, and then there were 3 slow tugs on the rope again, measured and polite, like someone with good manners asking for attention. The bell itself made no sound, and the line of rope trembled and stilled. The hairs on my neck went cold. Mr. Hobbs watched nothing, eyes on a point that existed for him and not for me. "Step out," he said. "Mind the stones. Is that your bell?" I asked him. It came out small. I didn't know what bells are for in cemeteries except the story about safety coffins and strings. The idea that we keep ropes so we can pull from below. He didn't answer. He turned his head like a person listening to the next thing he has to hear. The gate road beyond should have been the same path I'd taken up, but the lamps buzzed louder and the angles looked wrong, the steps longer than the width of the path should make them. Statues had their backs where I remembered their fronts. I thought of something Priya had said once while tapping her nails against a table until everyone wanted to leave, about how the brain has a way of smoothing unfamiliarity into a story you can live with. My brain wasn't smoothing anything. It was making jags. "Please," I said to Mr. Hobbs, because I felt silly and it made it easier to push the silliness away if I made a list. "I'll leave. I'm sorry, I just need the south gate." "South is locked," he said. "It's logged." He lifted the clipboard and shook it, and the page didn't flutter. "You're at north, mind the stones." The chill pushed through my jacket like a hand. I zipped without meaning to, a gesture left over from childhood. I had a looping anxiety, stupid but sticky, that the statues would look at me if I looked away, and that they would stay looking when I looked back. Mr. Hobbs started to walk again, and we took the path that climbs, which seemed wrong for leaving. The drizzle ticked faster. Water pooled at the base of a cedar, and some of the graves had sunk an inch as they do over years, and the edges of the slabs made little cliffs for snails. That's when I saw him, the other man. He was in the distance, further upslope, tall and very still. He wore a coat too thin for the cold, and he kept his hands inside his sleeves like he had no concept of pockets. When Mr. Hobbs lifted a hand, the man lifted his inch by inch like someone unrolling a strip of cloth. The 3 of us stood inside the lamps, and in the edges between everything was shadow. I smelled something like new pennies, a sharp metallic breath not from the rain. The man was humming. It was not the soda machine or pipes. It came out of him like he was trying not to. He didn't look up and he didn't look down. He moved nothing but the inner corners of his eyes. "Who is that?" I asked. I didn't whisper, which felt like a victory. Mr. Hobbs didn't answer. He altered our route to approach the chapel, though no sane person would seek more walls when escape is the goal, and that's how I found myself back where I'd started, one hand on the rail, looking through wavy glass at the dark inside the chapel where chairs sat like thoughts waiting to be formed. The bell rope in the watch house was visible when I turned my head, and it seemed shorter than it had been, a thought that didn't make sense until I realized a loop of it had been taken up and tied off, as if someone had pulled it and kept the pull. I thought again about the brass key, and my hand went to the pocket that no longer had it. I felt shorn. The main door to the chapel had an old Yale lock, the kind with a round keyhole that looks like a starter from a toy. The plate around it had scratches and arcs like a clock face. Mr. Hobbs took out a key ring and chose a key with slow intention that makes you want to help even when you can't. He put it in but didn't turn. He looked at the door like it had told him a joke he didn't get yet. "Mind the stones," he said softer. "We have a ledger. I don't want inside," I said. I said it plainly. "I want outside." He turned the key. The door opened with a breath that was warmer than the air outside, stale like velvet and hymnals. The humming thickened as if walls could trap it and give it back. The tall man moved closer now, his feet not making the sounds feet make on pebbled paths. He didn't bend his knees correctly, or at least not like regular walkers do. My camera strap stuck to my shoulder through my jacket, and I kept moving forward because backing up felt like something an audience would scream at you about. And nothing good ever happens to people who act like characters. Inside the chapel, candles that weren't lit sat in holders shaped like cups turned inward, and at the front sat a desk with a ledger beside it, the kind of thick book that encourages heavy pens. My name was in it, not just my surname either. My full name was there in someone else's hand, and there was a check mark under admitted and under departed. The time for departed was 2 hours from now. The page had smudges that could have been ink but looked like touching. The hairs on my arms tried to stand through the fabric. "I didn't sign this," I said. My voice fell and didn't bounce. The maglite caught the page and flattened the bumps out of the paper with light. "Sometimes they sign ahead," Mr. Hobbs said, like it was a bad habit we indulge. He tapped the book with his stained finger. "We keep the watches simple, mind the stones." "What is the watch?" I said. "What are we watching?" He didn't answer in words. He nodded at the front pew at the seat where he wanted me to sit. I didn't. The tall man had reached the doorway without crossing it, which I registered as a rule only when he didn't come in. His humming hit the threshold and returned to his mouth. He tilted his head the way birds do when they try to see a worm under the grass. He was younger than I thought at first, late 20s maybe, with flat hair pressed wet to his temples. My camera clicked when I touched it because nervous fingers do silly things. The click sounded too loud. He jerked with it and I thought of the rope, and the tugs in my heart found a matching rhythm. Against my sternum, something in me decided that waiting until 2 hours from now to be declared departed was the worst plan ever constructed by a fool, and I bolted past Mr. Hobbs before he had arranged his face to react. The door to the side of the chapel, the one to the little storage room where spare boards and flower stands lean, was ajar. A smell of vinegar and old metal lived in there, a tang that made saliva thin. I slipped in and drew the door and tried to breathe through a sleeve so my breath didn't bounce back hot and panicky. In that room I found shelves of string and old lamp mantles and a Fisker's lopper with orange handles that had chipped paint, and a roll of caution tape with only a few loops left. The window was too small for a person, which only made it a better target because our animal brains misjudge, and I put a crate under it anyway. When I tested the latch, a smear of some old oil got on my fingers and I smelled like pennies. The tall man had stopped humming. The absence was thick. The rope tugged again, once, twice, 3 times, patient, and I knew the soundless sequence in my bones like a code learned in school. I pressed the phone to my ear and Lila answered like she'd been looking at the screen. I didn't ask her to call anyone. I asked her to talk. She did, chewing hard, telling some story about a woman on the tube who held a giant balloon greenhouse and kept shifting to keep it from popping. The normality of her words passed through my ears and steadied my hands enough to think. Tools. I had tools. Maglite, camera, lighter. The lighter, the wick. The room would have oily air, things that disagree with flame. But the tiny flame would be mine and not theirs. I flicked it and it took once and then died because my thumb was damp. I dried it on my jeans and tried again, and the flame came up as a small sun. I held it near the window latch and the cold made the flame bend. I looked at the space, the angle, the probability that I could make myself smaller than the gap without scrambling my bones. Probable but ugly, better than ledger certainty. Stay on, I told Lila. Keep talking. I'm chewing, she said. I'm talking. She told me about someone named Alfie who collected steel brochures and never bought anything, and how he would tap each picture and say, "Not sure, not sure." I needed her chatter to be a bridge between minutes. Then the door into the storage room clicked and I realized my mistake. I had thought the one kind of door would be the only one. Mr. Hobbs stepped inside without a sound. He looked at the flame and at my hands and at the window and back to my hands. "Mind the stones," he said. He didn't sound angry. He sounded tired. "Don't let it draw you." He put one finger to the flame and my instinct was to snatch it away so he wouldn't burn himself. But he stopped with an inch to go. "They pull. We watch the pulls. That's the job." "What is he?" I asked, and my voice came out of me like it had wandered the cemetery before finding me again. "Not him," he said. "Them all. The ground writes itself. It asks for witnesses. It likes a number." He looked toward the humming and I looked with him, and there was no one in the doorway where there had been a tall man before. The humming went to the left wall and sank downward, as if someone had stepped through the floor. The pull on the rope came again, 3 patient tugs that didn't knock the bell, and I knew I had to choose something. The first choice was to hand back the lighter and sit in the pew and wait for the ledger to catch up. The second was to climb and bleed and make my way through a window and drop on the far side onto something I hadn't checked, and perhaps break both ankles and crawl among graves until light. The third was to leave through the front in a way that made no sense when a knot man was humming. I took the second choice because it belonged to me. The crate was a petty height and the sill bit my ribs when I wriggled. The maglite thumped to the floor and rolled and hit Hobbs's shoe. He didn't move to pick it up or to stop me. He put his left hand up like a man making the sign for someone to wait. And I knew from the clench of his jaw and the milky whites of his eyes that he was counting. "3, he said. "What?" I said. "Go on 3, he said, and I didn't ask why. He lifted 2 fingers, then 1. Somewhere the rope tugged in time, 1, 2, 3, and I squeezed and shoved and the window scraped the skin off my belt line, and my knee rattled bone against the frame. I dropped into a bed of damp leaves on the other side and rolled. The smell of wet earth went up my nose. I was out, and the drizzle that had taken short breaks came back with exaggerated politeness, tapping the top of my head like a busy friend. I didn't run because I didn't know which direction was south, and because the angels had faces turned toward vectors I didn't understand. I listened. The humming stopped. The lamps buzzed. A fox cried somewhere near the east wall and made the silly bark it makes when it thinks itself a person. The watch house bell rope took a small breath and let it out, and the sound of the rope fibers against each other was all bell in that moment, the ghost of a ring. The gate I found wasn't the one I used to get in. That's the thing about Highgate at night. Paths make choices for you if you walk them as if you don't have a say. This was the north gate by the looks of it, and the padlock sat with a smear of old blue paint on it that matched none of the surrounding metal. The key wouldn't help me. The key was back on its hook. I tested the chain and knew from the line of it that it wouldn't give. I put my hands on the top of the bars anyway and came away with black that smelled like old pennies, and that smell anchored me to the moment. I chose the wall instead. The wall was brick and wet and had a lip like it knew I'd need it. My boot slipped twice and bit the third time. I hooked a knee and then a thigh and then went over. I didn't fall far, but I landed wrong, and we all know you can land wrong from a foot and be more injured than when you fall from 10. My ankle shouted and then quieted. I lay on my back and looked up into trees that weren't inside the cemetery, which felt more dangerous than being inside. I could hear the road and a bus far off and the specific laugh of teenagers late, the laugh that has an edge like metal. I wanted to laugh back like a man pretending everything was fine. I didn't. I sat up. I was on Swain's Lane. The sodium lamps weren't so yellow. They just looked that way over stone. I looked through the bars like a child at a zoo, expecting a face up against mine, and nothing was there. The statues from this angle were regular. The main angel I'd been sure was pointing toward the watch house, aimed somewhere neutral again. Like accounting doesn't require drama. I limped along the wall to where the service gate was and stood in the dripping dark and listened for humming. Because you listen for the thing you hated when you want to know you're free. I heard only cars. I reached for my phone to call Lila and found a message already there from an unknown number. It said departed 0314. The timestamp on my phone said 0314. No one I know sends the word departed. Some systems do. Some ledgers do. I didn't reply. I went back the next afternoon because that's what people do when something feels like a story they've misread. The drizzle had moved on to another city and everything smelled like damp stone anyway, because those places carry weather inside them. I stayed on the public path and didn't trespass because daylight doesn't make laws disappear. Through the iron, I watched a man in a cap scrape moss with a tool that looked wrong and right, like a tiny hoe married to a paint scraper. He had nicotine fingers and he tapped the scrape tool against his boot twice when mud stuck. "Mind the stones," he told a young couple who'd wandered too close to a sunken plot. He didn't look at me. I didn't call to him. When he finished his bit of scraping, he walked to the watch house and went inside. Later, much later, I found the photograph I'd taken of the ledger. I don't remember taking it, which is its own flavor of fear because memory should be a set of bricks and not an idea. The picture is crooked, hasty, a bright wash where the mag light caught wet paper. The entry with my name is visible. Under departed, someone had crossed the time out and written the current time in a neat hand, a hand that cares what letters mean. In the bottom right corner of the page, so faint the paper almost refused to accept it, is a doodle of a bell and a single loop of rope with 3 tiny ticks beside it in a careful row. I want to say I don't know what that means, but I do and I don't at the same time, because some knowledge is looking and some is letting yourself be looked at. Since then, when I pass a church or a hall where a bell hangs on a rope, I feel my shoulder hitch toward it as if it's my job to watch for the pull, to make sure it happens in threes and not at random. At night, when my flat settles and the pipes adjust, it's amazing how many things can sound like fibers rubbing in a long, taut line. Once, half alive with sleep, I thought the wind had taken hold of the string that curls a blind and was tugging to let in a view of the dark. It wasn't. It was quieter than that and slower and patient in the way old places are patient. 3 slow tugs, and then the rope in the air was still. The first thing I remember is the little brass nameplate on the chapel door rattling as if it had a pulse. The air barely moved, but under the sodium lamps the metal clicked and shivered like teeth. Somewhere beyond the wall, traffic hissed and then went soft like someone turning down a tap. The drizzle made everything smell like wet stone and carnations. I'm 30, a teacher who grew up in the city, and I was in the cemetery after hours because my friends wanted to film real atmosphere for Dia de los Muertos, and I was the idiot who knew the caretaker, Pantheon. De San Lorenzo is old even by our grandparents' standards. A high wall painted sickly white separates it from the street, and the gate road is just wide enough for a hearse to drift like a boat. There's a watch house squeezed into the perimeter with a crooked clock that never reads midnight, a chapel with a bell rope hanging like a black vein, and narrow paths bristling with marigolds. I told Senor Ortega I'd bring him back his key before 10. He pressed the brass into my hand like a sacrament and said, "Después de las 9 ni un alma, ¿entiendes?" The key was heavy, the bow worn smooth by other fingers, and I kept clenching it in my pocket to feel brave. We weren't the only ones inside as the families packed up. People moved like shadows among the graves, placing sugar skulls and cups of atole, singing soft songs. A woman named Doña Pilar, little as a sparrow, tapped my arm and asked if we had spare matches. Beto, with the gravel cough, argued about a bouquet that had gone missing. Lucia swanned by with clove perfume strong enough to taste. Nacho's red scarf was a streak in the gloom as he carried out a crate of candles. Then the guard at the gate blew his whistle, the kind of tweet that sounds older than you are, and people flowed out through the iron teeth and into the city's pulse. We did not. Mina crouched behind the columbarium wall, recording the last of the paper banners as they flapped and went still. Lalo flicked a coin in his knuckles even when no one was watching, a nervous habit that sounded like a cheap clock. Tadeo had the boom mic hidden under his denim jacket and chewed cinnamon gum that cut through the wet. I stayed by the chapel door, trying not to stare at the bell rope, because every time I glanced up it looked a finger thicker, as if swelling. By the time the last lanterns bobbed off, drizzle thickened and bled the light into puddles. I heard the Yale lock at the front gate click and felt it in my teeth. The place changed when that happened. The city noise became the memory of noise. The marigold path glowed like embers. Our footsteps were sudden truths on the gravel. "We should go," I said, because that's what the reasonable part of me says first. "We will," Mina promised. "We just want the Candle Road." The Candle Road is a rumor. A line of tea lights appears after the cemetery closes, locals say, and if you follow it, you get to see what you shouldn't. Some people say it leads you to someone you miss. Some say it leads you where you belong. Either way, the older men in the puestos told us about it with a shrug that said, "You'll do what you want anyway." We didn't see it at first. We saw puddles and the pale shapes of statues, and we heard the little clicks of insects that had woken in the wet. Then Lalo hissed and pointed. From the perimeter path behind the mausoleums, a point of light trembled. Then another, and another, spaced like the beats of a tired heart. Tea lights low to the ground, ghost pale under the drizzle, burning steady though there was a wind you felt more than you heard. Are those allowed? Tadeo asked. The gum clicked. No one's here to stop us, Mina said, not looking at me because she knew I had the key and the conscience. We started along the Candle Road. The lights were set on the pathstones. Not many. Not enough to show the end, just enough to say come this way. Our maglite cut a hard tunnel and made the drizzle look like beads on a string. I kept the brass key in my fist until it left a print. We passed the watch house. The crooked clock read 9:30, though it had read 9:30 at 5 p.m. The radio on the desk murmured with no voice behind it, like it picked up the memory of chatter. We passed the caretaker's shed where a steel trimmer leaned against a rake and a Fisker's lopper sat like a steel beak. We turned at the back path where marble went to plaster and names went to nicknames. The Candle Road stayed one bend ahead, never letting us catch up. At the first corner I heard the bell. Not a peal you'd ring for a mass, not the chaos a child gives it. 3 slow tugs. Wood on rope, rope on bell. Bell speaking with its throat full of rain. We all froze and turned together like a school of fish. The chapel was 15 meters behind us, its door shut. The nameplate rattling slightly as water ticked off the eaves. Maybe Ortega is still here, I said. Maybe, Lalo said. And flipped his coin until it jumped and he didn't catch it. It landed on the path with a tiny kiss. We went on. The Candle Road took us past a family plot where all the photos had the same smile, past a statue of a saint whose eyes were worn to a gentle worry. The drizzle got inside my collar and made a path down my spine. The tea lights weren't going out no matter how the wind teased. I started to count them and lost count because they went on longer than there were hands to light them. We came to the mausoleum steps, the big ones set aside for people who liked to be sure. The steps had a smell beneath them when we drew near, damp and iron-rich, not rot but not clean either. Tadeo said it was just the cistern backflow and set down the mic to take a water bottle out of his pack. It hissed when he twisted the cap, a sound too loud for where we were. Mina filmed the steps and then the slit of a window with glass that looked old enough to bruise to the touch. Lalo asked, "You guys hear that?" And none of us wanted him to describe it first. There was a humming so low I thought it was me at first, the way your own blood gets loud when you stand up too fast. It pulsed, then paused, then pulsed again, almost like someone below us was breathing through a reed. Mina's camera screen jittered with lines. "Let's move," I said, but the Candle Road wanted us to turn. The tea lights led us along the mausoleum wall to a path I didn't know, and I've known that cemetery since field trips when we were made to take rubbings with charcoal. The path ended in a little elbow of wall, a place where the wind collected, where a bench held a soggy newspaper. The Candle Road stopped at a row of graves I'd never seen. 4 marble markers that couldn't be more than a day old. The chiseling was so crisp I could still see bits of powder packed into the letters. My maglite beam jittered when my hand did and the names lifted out of the shadow. Mina's name.
Lalo's name.
Tadeo's, mine. We stared until staring felt like reaching into fire. There were dates under each name. Today's date. Tadeo laughed first, the kind of laugh he does when he doesn't know who the joke is on. "Okay," he said, and the word smoked in the wet. "Someone's messing with us. Ortega?" Mina asked. "He saw us hide? He planned this?" "No," I said. I could hear the shape of the word better than I could feel the shape of the key in my hand. The graves were simple rectangles, clean and white, and the dirt at their bases had the slick sheen of something recently moved and tamped. The film of drizzle on the marble made it look like skin. There were no offerings. No flowers. Just the Candle Road stopping at the toes of our names like it had led a procession for us and then refused to go further. "Do we leave?" Lalo asked. His coin was back out, dumb reflex, flick catch, flick catch. He licked his lip and flinched as if he'd tasted something sour. "We leave," I said. "Now." The bell answered me. 3 slow tugs. Closer this time, like the air shivered beside my ear. We backed away from the graves and the Candle Road guttered. Not all at once. One by one the lights snuffed like eyes closing, and each time a light died, the drizzle caught the dark and made it feel thicker. The humming under the steps came back, or maybe it had never gone, and I realized that we'd been following it without knowing. Like you can walk toward a heartbeat in your head. We cut left instead of right and found ourselves between walls of niches. The columbarium rows made narrow lanes that turned us around. All the tiny doors had photographs, some smiling, some stern, some so faded that only the intent of a face remained. I recognized none of them and felt that wrong dread I had as a child when I lost my mother's hand in a market and had to pretend it was a game. "Gate Road?" Mina asked, and we ran and turned and ran again and came up hard against a fence where the jasmine vines had gone brown. The sodium lamps hummed. The city was a smear of light through the high, wet windows. My Motorola chirped. I'd forgotten I had it. Ortega had given it to me earlier with the look people give strangers they kind of trust. "Channel 1 to Gate," I said, "because the way you stop feeling stupid is to sound like you know what you're doing." "Ortega, are you there?" Static answered. Then a wet voice, a voice made of cloth, said, "Neonalma." Not a warning, a report. "We're on the backside," I said. "We need the gate." The radio went dead. The bell rope woke, 3 slow tugs. The sound carried over the marble like it had weight. I could feel it through the key, my fingers buzzing ambivalently as if they couldn't pick fear from cold. "We're not going to the chapel," Tadeo said. "No way." "The key," Mina said, looking not at me but at my pocket. I took the brass out because it seemed important, to be honest. The head of the key had a pattern that I had never noticed when Ortega handed it to me. The circles and crosses made a flower I could almost name. "Does it open the small doors?" Lalo asked. "Maybe the gate on this side?" "It opens the chapel and the main," I said. "So we go to the chapel," Mina decided. "It's closer than the main. We wait there until morning. We'll call from inside where the rain can't mess with the signal." The candle road had died, but another light showed itself. A weak yellow across the burial lawn, coming from the watch house. That clock that never showed midnight now showed midnight, and its face shone like a moon with a bad secret. The radio on the desk crackled once as if to cough. We went toward it because it was a place with walls and a roof. The door wasn't locked. My hand slipped on the handle, and then there we were in a room that held a roll-up cot. A stove, a ledger so thick it looked like it had its own bones. Rain tapped on the window and made the world outside jitter like film. The radio sat in its cradle and watched us. Mina put the camera on the desk and rubbed her fingers together as if thawing them. Lalo made the coin jump. Tadeo chewed, and the smell of cinnamon filled the room and made me hate gum for the first time. I picked up the ledger because it was the kind of object that makes you behave, like a book in a church. The pages had columns of names and dates in Ortega's square handwriting. People checking in the living to visit the dead. The last page had 4 names. Our names. Next to each, an empty box under Salida. "No," Mina said when I showed her. "No." "It's a prank," Tadeo said, and the way he said it reminded me you can call anything a prank if you don't wait for the punchline. Something moved behind us, between the stove and the cot. Not a person. A shadow with an opinion. I spun the maglite and caught the bell rope in the window reflection. It was still, as if it had hands to pretend with. "Chapel," I said, and the word was a verb. We took the back path, a corridor between crypts that turned like a key and made the cemetery into rooms. The drizzle thinned and then thickened again as if someone above us shook a cloth. I tried to count steps because rules calm me, and realized I was counting with the bell. 3 slow tugs, then a pause that felt like a held breath, then nothing until you thought you'd imagined it. Then again. The chapel door had scrolled iron across a pane of glass textured to look like water. The nameplate rattled. I put the key into the Yale lock and felt the old pins line up like vertebrae. When it turned, the sound had the right gravity. Doors like that like to be treated a certain way. "There will be phone signal near the window," I said like I knew. The inside smelled like wax and damp prayer cards. The pews were smooth, scuffed in the places where you see knees work over a lifetime. I closed the door with the weight of the key in my palm and the feeling of safety moving through me like heat after cold. The bell rope hung from a hole in the ceiling right by the altar, a dark length with a knot where a hand would like to grab. In the half-light, it looked worn in exactly the place someone my height would hold. Mina went to the window and held her phone against the glass, phoned to Rain, and shook her head. "Nothing," she said. "I get 1 bar and then the bar goes away." "We can sleep in here," Tadeo said. "There are blankets on the pew." "They're pew runners," Lalo said. But he picked one up and then put it down because his coin hand was restless, and that was how he knew this wasn't a place to make yourself at home. The bell tugged itself. 3 slow, deliberate pulls. The rope didn't move more than an inch. It didn't need to. The sound had room to grow in the chapel. It got into our bones and made our hearts adjust to a rhythm that wasn't ours. I grabbed the rope. Maybe because if I was going to be inside this, I wanted a hand on it. It looked as if it might bite, but it was dry and rough and polite about the way it resisted. I didn't pull, I held. The humming from the mausoleum steps rolled up my wrist as if a deep voice had spoken into my veins. "Don't ring it," Mina said. "Please don't ring it." The door latch clicked once without the door opening. The key in my other hand went colder, heavy enough that it felt like it belonged to the building and not to me. Something whispered against the outside wall. Drizzle, I told myself, finding a way to be inside and out at the same time. When the lights went out, it was only dramatic for a heartbeat. Sodium lamps dying don't go dark like switch hits. They stutter. The chapel kept a little light in the throat of its windows, but the mag light became necessary, and the beam carved us out of the room like figures in a diorama. I aimed it at the floor and let it pool so we didn't blind ourselves. In that cone of white, I saw the wet prints of shoes on the stone. They weren't ours. They came from the altar and stopped at the door and had no direction out. The radio on my belt crackled. "Salida," it said, Ortega's voice but not his breath. "Salida?" I lifted it and heard a soft tapping, as if the microphone and a fingernail were acquaintances. "We're in the chapel," I said. "We need you to open the main gate." The tapping stopped. No voice replied. But the key changed weight, and I understood suddenly that the door would not open to let us out if I asked it like a favor. It would open if I treated it like a job. "Guys," I said, "the key needed a decision, and the bell needed one too." Both asked for hands. "You can't lay two hands on two different gods at once." The bell gave 3 slow tugs that reached down into my stomach and turned something responsible there. The radio whispered, "Ni un alma." The printed names in the ledger had left their quiet ink in my mind. The candle road had ended at us like a sentence without a verb. "We have to mark our salida," I said, mouth dry. "We have to ring out. That's what you do when a soul leaves." "You're not ringing anything," Mina said, and her voice had the kind of strong tremor that cracks later. "You don't answer a rope that's been pulling itself." "So what?" Tadeo said. "We use the key and risk it?" "The door might not open." "I've seen that man. Doors decide who choose," Lalo said, and his coin skittered away into the dark and didn't come back. It made a sound against wood and then a little sound, a surprised gasp of a sound, and we all stood as if insulted. I put the key in my teeth so I could use both hands on the bell rope. It tasted like battery and old pennies. I held the rope and Mina grabbed my wrist and Tadeo grabbed my shoulder, and we were a chain of small wet animals insisting on a shape. I pulled once gently and the bell told the cemetery. 1. It set the humming into a new pattern. I pulled again, and the sound softened something in the walls as if the chapel had cheeks that could be stroked. The third tug was almost nothing, a kiss made of cotton. Outside, along the gate road, the sodium lamps brightened like someone had tightened them with a coin. In the glass of the window, I saw my face as a pale oval and other ovals behind me that belonged to the photographs on the niche doors outside, layered where they could see. The latch turned. We didn't wait for anyone to invite us. I took the key from my mouth and fit it like a homecoming into the lock and turned it, with a confidence I didn't have the right to, and the door swung. The drizzle came in like hands. We ran the gate road with maglite bouncing. The candles were back, not on the ground but on the low walls, short flames that leaned toward the main gate. They made halos on the wet stone. The humming had moved overhead or into the bell or into my chest. At the main gate, the lock waited. The Yale cylinder winked rain at me as if it had been laughing at my confusion all night. I put the brass key in and turned. I expected resistance. Instead, the lock turned with sighing ease. Too easy. Like you must have done this before in a memory you don't like to replay. The door opened to the city's brightness, but not fully. There was a chain with a padlock I couldn't see earlier, a detail like a punchline. It held the gate at a polite angle, enough to show a slice of a taxi and the smear of a taqueria's red sign. Not enough to let a person through without leaving skin and dignity behind. My stomach dropped so fast the rest of me had to follow. "Ortega," I called. "We're at the gate." The radio gave me someone else's breath. The bell gave me 3 slow tugs. The candles along the gate road went out, not with smoke but with a little knot of light. The drizzle stalled as if listening. Then the worst small thing happened, the kind that ruins you. A boy's voice spoke from behind the chapel, higher than ours. soft with a sleep he had no right to still be in, saying, "Mama." The door of the chapel cried on its hinges. The bell rope bristled, or I felt it bristle, ready to be answered. The graves behind the mausoleum waited with their names. There is more than one procession on nights like this. Some need the gate. Some need the bell. Mina turned toward the voice, a step only because her bones are better than mine. Tadeo swore and smiled to break the spell and failed. Lalo put his hands over his ears and made his mouth hard. A boy at a fireworks show he hadn't asked for. I put the key in my pocket and did what I knew how to do. I ran back to the chapel. The others followed, of course, because that's what we do when one person chooses wrong or right, fast enough to leave no space for debate. Inside, the window had gathered its rain again and made the cemetery into little pieces. The pews were now definitely pews you couldn't sleep on, because they had the angle of attention. The bell rope had the fact of a throat. I picked it up and didn't pull. I just held it so whatever had been asking wouldn't have to ask twice. The boy's voice had no direction. It was inside the rope or inside the rain. It said, "Mama?" again, and the second time was thinner, like a knot tightening. 3 tugs, I said, because the ledger needed an exit. 3 is for goodbye. 3 is for you, Mina said, but she didn't take my hand away. I pulled. Once a slow punctuation, twice a permission, the third time a mercy you give even if it's not yours to spend. The bell answered us with a clean, tired sound. The humming under the mausoleum steps loosened like a big animal settling. When we stepped out, the candles were gone. The drizzle had angled itself into mist. The radios everywhere in the cemetery, if there were any, were quiet. We walked back toward the main gate without talking, under lamps that had decided to be steady for a while. The padlock on the chain looked like it had always been there and always would be. When we reached it, it was open. No one had opened it, not anyone I can accuse. It just lay against the hinge like a phone set down. We left as people leave places where their names are trapped. We didn't run. We carried the key and the camera and the gum and the habit of flipping a coin even though our bodies had remembered another, more important rhythm. Ortega stood just inside the watchhouse door, making tea in a tin cup, and looked right through me like he was finishing a different shift in a different year. "Después de las 9, he said, and didn't finish, but the phrase sat there like a shoe by the door. I set the brass key on his desk. The ledger was open to our page. In the salida boxes, someone had made 3 small strokes. 3 marks. I didn't make them. I don't think Ortega did either. He didn't look down. He sipped. The crooked clock showed 9:30 again, having refused the midnight we needed. We walked out into a city that had washed itself a little while we were away. A bus hissed on wet asphalt. The taqueria sign burned red and honest. My friends didn't talk because the sentences were too complicated. When we turned at the corner, I looked back at the wall and the gate and the part of my life that had been on that side of it, and I could not tell if the bell had rung for us or with us. Nights since then, the smell of wet stone tilts my heart toward doors. Sometimes a coin jumps in my hand and I don't even have a coin. I don't keep brass or bells in my apartment, but in the hour before sleep, when the city gets soft and the air in my room goes cool and damp for no reason, I hear a sound from far away that arrives right next to my ear. 3 slow tugs, patient as a hand on a shoulder. 3 slow tugs like a name on a page waiting for a mark. 3 slow tugs and then nothing. The kind of nothing you lean into if you're not careful. The nameplate on the family crypt rattled like teeth when the wind came around the chapel. Gravel hissed as something settled under the sod. A bell cord hung in the watchhouse and twitched once, just enough to make the brass tongue breathe against the cup. The sound cut off when I swung my mag light up and the beam caged everything in hard white. I'm a 35-year-old night guard at Campo Verano in Rome, working the graveyard shift to cover a debt and because I thought the dead were easier than the living. It was February, a cold drizzle that got in under the collar, the kind of rain that looks like smoke under the sodium lamps. I'd done the rounds along the perimeter road and stamped my boots at the gate, watched the city traffic on Via Tiburtina blur by, then stepped back into the quiet that isn't quiet at all. You learn the noises, water ticking off marble, cats slinking between the headstones with tails up like question marks, roses sagging into mud. My Motorola scratched to life for the check-in from the day caretaker. Johnny, with his coffee breath, promised the leaf blower was fixed and called me ragazzo even though I'm older than him. And then it was just me and the map board. the brass keys in their little numbered hooks, and the ledger that still smelled faintly of vinegar and glue because some intern had restored it. I had a route. The watch house sits by the first gate. From there I walk the west wall, the old Jesuit section with the stone angels whose noses have been gone for a century. I check the gate to the cremation columbarium, then the newer grid of family plots, then the steep steps down to the older Roman vaults. The route is boring, which is the point. Boring means no one's kicked in a gate or pried off a bronze vase or spray-painted a name. Tonight I felt the boring snag on something. The first snag was small. Gate B on my sheet was marked relocked by day staff at 16. Wow. The padlock's pin should have been turned so the number faced the path. It wasn't, it was flipped inward facing the lawn. I corrected it with a gloved thumb and made a note in the ledger. It's one of those nerd habits that keeps me steady. Write everything down. Weather drizzle. Lamps humming. Gate B pin reversed. If something goes missing, if a family complains, my notes are the difference between my word and theirs. The second snag was damp soil where it shouldn't have been. Plot 3412, the Menacini family. 3 generations lined like books on a shelf. The grass at the foot of the father's stone had a dark stain that had soaked sideways toward the path, as if someone had knelt there with a bucket and spilled. I tapped it with my boot toe. The ground gave a long sighing shift I felt in my ankle. I told myself the drainage had backed up with the drizzle. Still, I sent a photo to the work phone. Menacini 3412 soft ground. The phone tried to send and failed, then showed me my own reflection in the black glass. 15 minutes in, when I cut past the chapel toward the roped-off steps down to the oldest mausoleums, I heard it. A faint humming under my feet. Not the sodium lamps, they whine like mosquitoes above your head. Not the refrigeration in the chapel's side room. That's a stronger rumble. This was low and smeared, like someone singing 3 rooms away with a door closed and more doors beyond that. My brain told me it was pipes, the rain battering through clogged stone. My gut told me it had melody. I stood on the top step, leaned to catch it again, and felt the old stone cold through the soles of my boots. The humming stopped when I stepped down. The humming started when I stepped back up. I laughed, which sounded too loud in the wet air, and told myself that was a story to tell Gianni so he'd stop calling me ragazzo. By the watch house door there's a bulletin board with notes from the families. Requests to turn flowers, to check candles, to sweep. 1 yellowed square marked the Rossi family mausoleum. Check interior for damp after last storm. It had been pinned for 3 days, and I'd meant to get the key and go with Gianni during daylight. Night is bad for complaints because if I find anything, there's no one to complain to but the dark. Still, I took the brass key for the Rossi crypt from its hook. It's new against the old wall. All fresh-cut letters, a clean rectangle with roses in bas relief. It sits along the lane that leads past the chapel, right where the drizzle lifts into a mist that swallows the end of the path. The key had a weight that made itself known, the way a promise sits in your pocket. I told myself I'd just check the door for damp and put the note at the top of the stack. Past the chapel, my radio chirped. "You hear the storms coming in from the south?" Marco, the other night guard, older than both of us. All nicotine voice and a toothpick that bobbed when he talked even if you couldn't see it. They said the wind might knock those lamps behind Section C. Don't go back there unless you need to. The ground goes slick. My cousin fell last winter. Copy, I said. I'm just checking the Rossi mausoleum. That the brand new one? Rich people think marble makes you immortal, he said. Call if you need me. I'm in the caretaker shed. The steel crank rope keeps snapping. It's like it knows. I could hear him suck his teeth around the toothpick. The drizzle tapped against the watch house window, and when I stepped back out, the air had that cut metal smell of rain that's about to commit to something heavier. Procedures are what keep fear small. You do the same thing in the same order, so I did it. I swept my light along the lane, pausing at spigots and trash urns, checking the lock plates on the bronze doors. The old names stared back with their serif letters like miniature granite newspapers. At the Rossi mausoleum, I clicked my light off and listened. Drops a retreating cat, something shifting deep in the stacks. Then under my boots, a smear of humming, low and steady. It was stronger here, like I'd stepped onto the lid of a music box. The key did not want to seat. The Yale cylinder on the Rossi door was clean, but the key caught like there was lint in there, something felted. I turned it gently. My glove cut against the knurling. The lock gave with a tiny sigh you feel more than hear. I opened the door and the smell slid out. Not rot, Not decay. Vinegar metal, like penny jars and old paperbacks kept in damp kitchens. My light went in a stripe across polished stone, across a narrow landing with a wrought iron rail, and then down the first set of steps. The Rossi crypt was newer but built in the older style. A little entrance vestibule, then a set of stairs to a lower room where the coffins slide into the walls. Just check the air, I told myself. Find where the damp is pooling. Write a note for Gianni. I stepped in, and the humidity wrapped around me like a towel someone forgot to wash. The door eased against the hinge, and somewhere a whisper cut off. It was a whisper because it had the shape of words without the edges. The maglite beam quivered because my hand did. I told myself it was cold. The light caught dust motes that moved like slow snow. The first landing felt wrong. Not spooky wrong, but wrong like a carpenter made a mistake and hit it. The left step dipped a little. The right felt high, humming from the stone, faint and steady. I thought of Sister Benedetta, who used to visit her parents every first Sunday and hum unembarrassed hymns while she polished the brass. She passed last spring, a little winter sparrow gone quiet. I shook the thought off because I had a job. Ciao, I said, because it's a thing you do. Talking into empty rooms down here. You make your voice swim around the corners. Cimitero, Guardia. You say your role like a password. It makes you feel like the threshold is a place you own. The lower room was compact. 6 wall slots, 3 on either side, 2 empty. Rosettes on the slab fronts, numb little flowers that don't bloom. The damp had left its signature on the upper left corner, a crescent of darker stone where water finds its way like a thief. Something dripped in a steady tick, though the ceiling looked dry. My light landed on a brass nameplate still wrapped in plastic. Under the plastic, the letters stamped through were crisp. Rossi Giulia, 1948-2025. My brain hung on the newness of the last number. My day off had been yesterday. No one told me there'd been a burial. I checked the ledger note in my head and it didn't match. Behind me, something brushed my shoulder. Just air. The door easing back from where it had been propped open to the drizzle outside. The hinge spoke in a long, unhappy tone. The door sealed with a thick metallic kiss. I'd left it ajar. I know I had. The hair on my arms did a stupid dog trick even under the jacket. The radio on my belt hissed. You in there? Marco, casual, like he calls out while peeling an orange. Yeah, I said. Door swung shut. Checking damp. Ledger's wrong about a placement in here. Copy, I've got an eye on section C, lamps strobing. Makes it look like people are walking when they're not. Keep your head on. The humming strengthened, a thin wire that went through my feet and up my knees. It had intervals like a song I knew when I was 6. Like someone not whistling. My tongue lifted to catch a note and found metal in the air, copper on the back of my teeth. I swung the light up the steps to the door, because light makes doors honest. My beam picked up on something small just under the lip of the door. A tidy triangle of marble dust like a breadcrumb pile. I went to sweep it with my boot and felt the step give again, that left-right wrongness. When I put my weight on the left side, the humming got louder by a hair. When I leaned right, it softened. The step was talking if I knew the language. I tried the door. The handle turned with the smoothness of new money and then stopped dead. It wasn't pressure. It was held. I didn't yank. People panic and yank and break the thing that can still be fixed. I checked the bolt. The bolt was withdrawn. Something on the other side had settled like an ear pressed to a pillow. The lock said it was open. The door didn't care. Marco, I said into the radio. It hissed like a snake that doesn't want to be found. Door's stuck. Something's wedged it from outside, I think. Can you come? Static took a breath. Then his voice, on my way. Wind picked up. If the lamp drops, call emergency. The room felt close in a way I know too well. My father used to fix battered kitchen cabinets and call me to hold the door straight while he set the hinge, and I'd stand with my face pressed at nose level to laminate and fight the urge to breathe too hard. That kind of close. The beam of my maglite landed on the central slot. A faint fog sat inside the glass panel, like someone breathed on it and then left the breath behind. I wiped the panel with my cuff out of habit. The fog was inside. The whisper came again, closer. It was a breath thickening a syllable. I didn't hear a name. I felt the letter shapes in my chest like a sore cough. There was no place to hide here. The only place was the steps up to the door that didn't open. The only thing to do in a place like that is do what you can touch. Procedures, inventory, tools. I thumbed off the radio, then on, to make sure it wasn't dead. I took the brass key back out of my pocket and shoved it into the inside cylinder. A stupid habit because the inside didn't have a keyway. The stupid habit slowed me down enough to think. In the corner where the wall met the floor, the marble was a barely different shade. A cut line. A square the width of a shoebox. I put my gloved fingers against it and it didn't move, which meant it had a screw or a lever I couldn't see. If you've ever worked in older mausoleums, you know they hide things in them. Little tool caches, drain access, sometimes the old bell cords, the old stories. If a mourner got shut in, if a mistake got made, they could tug a string and ring a bell in the watch house. We don't use those now. Still, the cavities are there. I let my gloved thumb move around the square and found a burr, a little inverted star where a screw wanted to be. My brain said I didn't have a star driver. My hand said I had the brass key. I bent, put the tip of the key into the burr, turned. It grabbed enough to shift the square a half-inch. The humming came brighter when it popped, a tooth released from a socket. I used the key to walk it up and off. My light held in my teeth, the taste of wet leather and metal and coffee from earlier soaked into the strap. Behind the plate was a cavity with a coil of dry rope and a small iron lever. The rope ran up and to the right, into the wall, toward the entrance. I didn't want to pull it, I did. It felt like sneaking an apple as a kid and knowing the apple would squeak. I wrapped the rope once around my wrist and tugged 3 times, slow. The rope gave back a tiny echo in the wall, a ghost of movement like a body rolling over under blankets. Then the lever moved itself a little, bumping my knuckles. The door at the top of the steps eased a finger width. I could see the glow of the sodium light. The drizzle made needles where the beam hit it. I stood up too fast, head buzzing. When I reached halfway, something on the glass of the center slot released a drop that ran like a tear and stopped. Perfectly round, at the letter L of Julia. It sat there considering, and then divided into 2 smaller drops that clung like eyes. "Keep it together," I said out loud. My voice sounded like someone else cleaned it and returned it to me. "You're doing your job. You're going to open the door. You're going to call Marco. You're going to write this down and then stay out of basements at night forever." I shoved my shoulder into the door and felt an answering shove back. Not equal and opposite, not physics. It was laziness moving. The whole slab grumbled and scraped across the floor just enough to make a slit that would fit a body sideways. I got my hips through, pushed with both legs, and then I was outside again on the landing. Air moving against the damp like relief has a temperature. The drizzle had turned to an honest rain. The sodium lamp above the lane buzzed, then flickered into darkness, leaving everything in a softer, more private light from the chapel step lights. I turned back to the door because you always secure what you leave. The humming had dropped to a question. The rope in the wall had retreated like a snake. I put my hand on the door to pull it shut, and through the glass of the center slot in the fog on the inside, someone had drawn a line. A finger line. It was crooked because the finger had hurried. The line curved, then curved again. When it stopped by the L of Julia, it looked like a letter J turned on its back. "My name starts with J," my radio barked. "At the lane," Marco said. "You good?" I got it open. "Don't come down," I said before I realized how that would sound. "Something's off with the door. It can hold itself shut. Doors don't hold. They just fall," he said. And I heard in his voice that he was smiling around the toothpick without thinking. Then the smile drained. "What's that noise?" "What noise?" "Sounds like humming," he said. The rain thickened, the spaces between drops gone. The downpour flattened the world. "It's the steps," I said, and started moving anyway, because if he was coming, I wasn't going to meet him by the door that wanted to be closed on my back. The stone vibrates. I found an old rope. The door's lighter if you tug it 3 times. 3, he repeated, like you repeat the numbers in a combination lock. "I'm bringing the Fiskars." The old iron swells in this weather. He was a square of shadow in the rain by the chapel when I got to the top. He shook his head like a dog, water spraying off the bill of his cap. The toothpick was tucked behind his ear. He said, "You're white like paper," and I said, "It's cold," and we both pretended we were that simple. We went before another lamp died and convinced the night to be only what it was. He kept the Fiskars slung low. It's a pruner, not a pry bar, but it has steel and weight and the promise of a pivot. When we reached the Rossi door, something made a quiet sound on the other side, like a cuff on a sleeve brushing glass. The finger line that made the J was beaded with moisture again, shining in the little chapel light like a slug trail. "You did that?" Marco asked. No, I said, and he didn't move for a second. I could hear him listening to the humming through his boots the way I had, feeling it raise the hair inside your bones. He used the Fisker's handle as a lever while I set my shoulder again. 3 tugs, I said, and he frowned like he'd misheard and then nodded because he hadn't. I went down 2 steps, found the little plate, slid it with my key again. The rope was there. I wrapped my wrist and gave it 3 slow pulls. Nothing. I gave 3 more and felt something hitch on the 3rd, like a breath held, then surrendered. The lever slid, scraped. The door yawed. Marco's curse was affectionate when he's relieved. Madonna, we didn't talk inside. He swung the beam of his mag light in short punches that caught the brass, the plastic over the nameplate, the fog on the glass. The humming thickened, then thinned like tide. The room felt the way the church feels when it's been locked after an evening service. A closed worm that knows more than you. I showed him the damp crescent, the way the ground gives if you're not careful. He crouched to look at the plate like he knew what it should be. Knew, he said, touching the screw with his thumbnail. Tomorrow we clean, yeah? Not tonight. Ledger's wrong, I said and snapped a photo of the nameplate with the work phone. It didn't take. The screen showed me gray, then a smear, then my own surprised face in soft reflection. The whispers hadn't said anything since I'd opened the door. That silence had weight. Noise means something is working. Quiet means a thing is thinking. Out, he said, not unkind. We backed up the steps. At the door, he paused the way you pause at a friend's bed after surgery, reluctant to turn away because what if they need you right now? Close it, he said, and I pushed it toward shut. When it met the frame, something inside the wall tripped. A little spring noise, and the weight landed on the hinge as if the house breathed out. He tugged the door once, twice, 3 times. It held. He nodded like he'd checked a knot. We made the notes in the watch house. Marco had a ritual I learned to copy. He taps the corner of the ledger page 3 times before he writes. He says it makes the words stick. He didn't do it that night. He wrote plainly, Rossi Mausoleum door catches. Humming steps. Check drainage. The drizzle slowed, went back to needle rain under the lamp halo. He put the Fiskers back on the hook, said, You want coffee? And I said, In a minute. Because my stomach felt like it was reading ahead and didn't like the next chapter. I checked gate B again because the pin had bothered me. It was correct. I checked the Mendocini ground because the stain had bothered me. It looked drier, or maybe I'd gotten used to wet. I walked past the chapel because the humming bothered me, even though now the steps were quiet under my boots. We have a little radio on a shelf that plays local stations when it's slow, but I kept it off. I wanted the night to say only its own name. At around 4, a woman came under the gate with an umbrella bigger than she was and a scarf tied up to her eyes. She wasn't supposed to be there. Marco stepped out, said Signora closed, in his best doorman voice. She nodded quickly, rain rat-tatting on her umbrella, and held out a folded paper. It was a copy of the burial authorization for Giulia Rossi, a rubber-stamped signature at the bottom. She said her name was Marta, a cousin, and she asked if someone had placed the photo inside. We forgot the photo, she said, eyes red like she'd scrubbed them. I can't come tomorrow. I have the train for Perugia. We went, I said, before my brain reminded me that was a stupid thing to say. No one inside now. She bit a lip and did something I'll always remember. She lifted the umbrella and leaned her forehead against the wet iron of the gate like she needed what the cold would take from her. She smelled like wool and laundry soap. Behind her the city ran wet and yellow. I'll leave the photo, she said, and slid it through the bars in a plastic sleeve. Please, if you can. She had printed it at a drugstore. It was a young woman in a polka dot dress carrying a basket of lemons, hair in a scarf, her eyes laughing at whoever took the picture. When she had gone, I dried the sleeve with a rag and put it on the shelf in the watch house. The brass keys hung solid, refusing to shine. At dawn, relief does what it does here. Turns everything from black and gold to gray and white. The drizzle gave up. The cats came to sit like little guards and ask for nothing. I made a choice then that I think about too much now. It was safe and it made sense and it changed nothing and everything. I took the brass key. I took the photo. I went back to put the picture in the slot and give the living something to carry home. The path held that wide, soft quiet that only comes when the birds haven't started yelling yet. I kept my beam off because the sky did enough. The steps down to the Rossi crypt looked the same. Stone doesn't change, you tell yourself, so you can keep ignoring how much it does. I put the key in the lock and felt the stiff give. The door opened like a held breath let go. Inside, the fog on the glass was gone. The room smelled like the vinegar metal had been replaced with drier air, as if the place had exhaled and started over. I slid the photo into the little clip on the slot face and straightened it so the lemons weren't crooked. The name under the glass looked at me with its clean letters. The last number sat there, a fact in the room. I took a step back. The sole of my boot found the left dip in the step, and the humming came up under my foot like a hand over a throat. It was stronger now, not low. It had words without bones. I don't claim to know Italian any better than a man who's worked a gate for 7 years has to, but I know my own name. The whisper said it the way a teacher says it, when you haven't been listening. My radio refused to be itself. Static tightened into a long rope that didn't reach either end. I put my hand on the lever door plate before my head did, because the body remembers how to not be trapped. The plate was cool. The rope inside was dry, a good sign. I had the key. I had a door. The choice felt like this. Go and tell Marco to do it together because that's how we do. Or do it now while the morning is softer, because the dead are lighter in the first light. I pulled the rope once without thinking, and then thought of how that would sound to whoever designed it 100 years ago. I gave it 2 more slow, felt the lever move, felt the door settle into itself. The humming made a soft surprise noise, like someone who sees a window open that they didn't touch. When I stepped out onto the landing, dawn had made the drizzle into steam. The lamp above me buzzed, then went quiet. From the steps under me, a faint run of vibration followed me like a dog that sometimes bites. I pulled the door just far enough to let it rest against the frame and turned the key. Now, weeks later, we still get the hum sometimes. Not every night. Not even most. It's there like a song under a song when the weather is right, and the old stone decides it can be a throat. Johnny taps the ledger 3 times now before he writes. He doesn't know I watch him. Marco keeps the toothpick tucked in the same place and pretends his left knee isn't angry from that wet night. Under the watch house bell, the cord is tied in a neat loop so it won't sway when the drafts come. But sometimes the brass tongue breathes against the cup, just enough that you'd miss it if you didn't live in this place. The photo of a woman in a polka dot dress carries its own light in the little frame. A priest came through last Thursday and blessed the Rossi stone because Marta asked, and I stood with my hands in my pockets and looked at the steps and thought of the wrong weight that settled on the door. How it held itself shut, how it opened when it wanted. I thought of the rope in the wall and the triangle of dust. I could have asked the priest to say more words. I didn't. This place has its language and it doesn't need mine. Here's the part that won't let go. Last night, when the rain came back, I heard the humming again under the chapel stairs. I walked with my light off because the sky had enough bare light to make the stones glow that flat gray they get right before morning. I put my boot on the top step, leaning left without meaning to because that's where the stone dips. The hum lifted under me, joined by a dry breath like old paper sliding in a drawer. I stood still a long time. Then I felt the tug in the bones of the step itself. A careful little pull 3 times, slow, like someone is reaching up from inside my route, inside the stone I trust, testing if I still remember the way to let them out. The bell in the watch house gave the faintest touch against its cup. No ring, just that quiet metal kiss. I told myself the wind did it. I tell myself that now so I can stand my post tonight, with the key warm from my hand and the steps humming under my boots. The first thing I heard was the rattle of a nameplate somewhere behind me, soft as loose teeth in wind. The fog made every sound close, so close I jerked and swung my light, expecting a face an arm's length away. The second thing I noticed was my shoes, darker and slicker than a minute ago, the drizzle beating up under the sodium lamps and turning the path into dull glass. The third thing was that the gate I had just come through didn't show as a silhouette anymore. The lamps were just halos in the white. I'm 33, a translator who cuts through Aoyama Cemetery on my walk home because it saves 4 minutes and because I always have, even when my mother swore there were kappa in any place with standing water. It was Halloween, which means nothing in Tokyo besides convenience store pumpkins, but it had rained all day and I wanted to get inside. The path I take runs from the Sendagaya side by the old watch house, down along the big pines, then out near the temple gate. I know the turns. I know the stones. That night I stepped in, glanced at my grandmother's carving like I always do, and the fog swallowed the rest. My grandmother's grave is 4 rows before the temple gate, under a camellia that drops slick red petals in winter. The stone is narrow and plain, The date clean and hard to see in low light. I usually stop, say her name in my head, and keep walking. That night I stopped for an extra second because the soil in front of the base looked dark. Not just from rain, but churned a little, like someone had shifted it with a boot heel. I crouched and tapped the ground with my knuckles. It sounded solid. Mud stuck under my nails and I wiped it on the back of my jeans. A nameplate rattled again 2 rows over and I told myself, it's wind. It's just wind, but the air didn't move on my skin. I stood and realized I couldn't see the gate. Couldn't see the path, couldn't see more than 2 meters. I tried to orient by the pines. They were just darker smudges in the white. The fog wasn't wet cotton. It was the kind that reflects your own light back at you. I clicked off my phone flashlight and it got better by a pinch. Sodium lamps in fog are foxfire, weird and orange. I told myself I could feel the ground with my feet. The paths are gravel, the plots are packed clay. I found the gravel and went right because right should have led me toward the Temple Road. The first bend confirmed it. I recognized a family plot with a bronze water ladle chained to a basin. The chain had a small brass key on it, bright even in the dim. The key was unusual enough that I paused. The ladles are always chained, sure, but the chain didn't normally have anything else. The key was stamped with a letter I couldn't make out. It was warm from someone's hand, or maybe from the ambient air trapped by the fog. I left it, walked on, and the smell hit me, sharp as a cleaning cabinet. Vinegar and something metallic under it. 30 seconds later, I found myself stepping on someone else's offering. 3 sticks of incense, wet and unlit. I apologized to the air because that's something my Aunt Naoko drilled into us, and lifted my foot. Shoes do the thing in drizzle where they squeak if you push off too hard. I slowed down. My phone vibrated once in my jacket. A message from Rio, my cousin. Are you still coming by? Auntie made Odin. I typed back, yeah, cutting through. My screen glowed blue and the fog swallowed it when I put the phone back. Another rattle. Another path, another small basin, and I stopped caring that it might be 5 minutes or 7. I walked until my breath got out of sync with my steps, and then I saw her name. My grandmother's surname, crisp and the same size as it had always been, on a stone to my left. For a second I laughed, a bark of breath that bounced back into my face. There are other families with that name. Of course there are. But this stone wasn't mixed with other names. It was a twin of the one I'd just left, down to the chipped corner where my aunt leaned too hard a year after the funeral. I reached out, ran my finger along the chip, and it had the same rough feel I remember. A scraping sound came from the steps to the small mausoleum across the path. Not a big public one, but the kind that belongs to a rich family. I knew because I've read the plaques when I've been bored. The scraping was like wood against stone. My light picked out the steps and the gate at the top. The gate was a simple Yale lock with a shackle. The fog bruised it orange. I moved toward the sound because that's the kind of person I am. I check. I like the reality of things. On the 3rd step, the smell of vinegar metal got strong enough to catch the back of my throat. I coughed and waved at nothing. Sumimasen, I called, because voicing the apology felt like a key in itself. Is someone there? Something hummed. It wasn't a person. It was low, below chest height, the kind of sound a big air conditioner makes when your ears are ringing. I froze with my foot lifted off a step and put it down gently. The gate's lock had a thin smear on it, like an oily polish, and the smear streaked when my knuckle brushed it. Down at my feet, the bottom step had a muddy scuff like a dragging shoe. A detail. A half-rotten camellia petal looked crushed along the edge. Behind me, a voice came through the fog. Male, older, with a Tokyo lilt that always sounds like the speaker's a little amused. Oi, you lost, young man? I turned and found him by his light, a rectangle shining through the white. A man stepped into view, 50 or 60, in a navy work jacket with the kind of wide shoulders that come from lifting things more days than not. A Motorola radio hung off his chest. His hand rested on a mag light like it was habit. He smelled like peppermint when he got close, and the peppermint cut the vinegar. I'm not lost, I lied, just trying to cut through. Fog came up fast, he grinned, which made his eyes disappear. Halloween, he said like a punchline, then looked past me at the gate, the steps, the Yale lock. He clicked his tongue twice, a habit, looked at the lock again. Abe, he said, tapping his chest. Caretaker on nights. You should stick to the road. Come, I'll walk you. My grandmother's stone is there, I said, pointing. I keep seeing it. That one. And before. It was over there. He slid his light over to the stone, I meant. He didn't read the names out loud, and I appreciated that. He did what caretakers do and checked the ground, poked the soil with the toe of his boot. "The fog folds things," he said. "Don't follow the folds." Sorry, I sound like my mother. We had a boy come through during the Oban when the fog was like this. He went in circles and got angry. People always get angry. He tilted his head and studied my face. "You're not angry." "I'm fine," he nodded and turned. "We have a map in the watch house just there, 2 minutes. Then I'll send you out near the temple." We walked, or I thought we did, for 2 minutes. The ground under us shifted from gravel to packed clay to gravel again. The fog's texture changed. It started tasting like laundry left too long in the washer. My shoulders hunched in a way I couldn't help. Abe talked like people who sing to children when they know the child might cry. He said the families he'd known over the years here, how Mrs. Sato always brought chrysanthemums with a single drop of soda in the vase, and how Mr. Tanaka argued about sap dripping from pines. Background details, all of them normal and human. He mentioned a volunteer named Mika, who came on weekends and wore chipped blue nail polish because she claimed it matched the sky no matter the weather. It was a catalog of quiet things. The watch house silhouette didn't appear, and Abe's voice faded a notch as he tried the radio. "Abe," he said, the way you announce yourself when you don't want to say too much, and the static came back like something exhaling. "Abe?" A woman's voice answered, thinned by the fog. "You still in there?" The "in there" made my skin try to crawl backward along my bones. "In the lanes," he said. "Fog's sitting." "I've got one. Guide him." His thumb hung on the transmit button an extra second. Then he let go, and we both heard a faint humming under the static. A perfect match for the hum I'd heard at the mausoleum steps. A beat later, the woman said, "Copy," her voice like cold tea. Abe clicked his tongue again, a faster rhythm. He stopped near another basin. The chain on this one carried not just a ladle, but a brass key like the one earlier. This one had the letter stamped deep enough to read. Abe lifted it and let it drop. The clink was absorbed by the white. "Tourists like to copy keys," he said absently. "These don't open anything." He picked it up again, thought better of it, and slid the key into his pocket like it could stay warm there. We turned and came to a place that felt open. The fog mimicked space by letting the lamp halos spread farther. I thought of the fields around my school when the morning fog came low, how the noise of cars turned into a steady shh. We stood in the open place, and I smelled the vinegar metal again. Not sharp this time, but pervasive, like my mouth was full of copper. Abe's hand tightened on his maglite. "Do you smell that?" "Yeah. I hate that smell," he said without drama. "The way you say you hate a shirt that still holds the scent of someone who is gone. I got it strong once under the chapel steps. We've been trying to tell facilities to check the pipes. They're building the new columbarium and everything's a mess." He looked at me like he wanted to make a joke about bureaucrats and didn't have the energy. Another voice off to our right said, "Abe-san." A woman's silhouette stepped out. The glow of a small headlamp like the runners wear, blurring her features. She lifted her hand, a mitten with a hole at the thumb. "I brought extra wicks," she said by way of introduction. She had a cigarette voice and the kind of hair that frizzes in rain. Her name, when she gave it, was Ari. She handed Abe a small packet. He dipped his head and said, "Thank you." The three of us stood there, the fog pressing in like a fourth person. Ari pinched her left earlobe, a habit she probably didn't know she had, and watched me with a look that was almost humor and almost not. "Want the back road?" she asked me. "It's faster." She gestured a line with her hand in the air. "We keep thinking it's straight, but the fog is bigger than us. I just need out near the temple." "Of course," she said, but her face said something else. She adjusted her headlamp and the beam stuttered. "Wick's wet," she muttered. "They never stay lit long in this weather." She blew on it, and for a second the light brightened before dimming, the way a candle does when a door opens in a room. The smell of vinegar metal sharpened. Abe's radio hissed at his chest, and under the hiss I heard my grandmother's name, spoken as if someone was reading from a list. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Abe didn't answer. He tilted his head like a dog and thumbed the radio. "Say again." The radio gave us open static, then snapped like someone smacked it. Ari rolled her shoulders, the movement of a runner trying to keep warm in a starting corral. "They're relocking the gate," she said toward the static, half a joke. "Hurry up." She gave a small nod in a direction that felt wrong. I balked. The gate should be this way. I pointed the opposite way. "Tonight," she said, "the cemetery's full of should." She made the word soft, like a blanket you put over someone asleep on a couch. "You can hold to the map in your head, or you can hold to one of us and we'll hold to what the ground does under our feet." I held to Abe, meaning I stepped closer, and he started walking. Ari fell in behind us. The path slanted down, which made no sense. The temple gate is higher. I told myself again about folds, about fog like fabric. The sodium lamps hummed, and every few feet one would pop louder and then settle. Each pop made my ribs hollow. We came up on a set of low steps. I knew these steps, except I didn't. The slick felt the same. The slick felt new. At the top was a gate, and at the center of the gate, a Yale lock. The same smudge on the shackle, the same greasy streak, the same camellia petal crushed just so. I wiped my fingers on my jacket and said, too loud, "We've been here." "Yes," Ari said simply. Abe's jaw worked. He looked around like he could call the fog's bluff by finding a landmark. He set his mag light on the top step, and it illuminated a thin, clear vein running along the edge of the stone, like water that hadn't slid yet. He reached into his pocket and took out the brass key he'd pocketed from the basin chain. He balanced it on his palm like he hadn't meant to. "These don't open anything," he repeated, but he said it quieter. "You know whose stone I keep seeing?" I asked. "My grandmother. I've seen it 3 times in different places." I laughed, then stopped because it made me feel like something had stepped from behind a tree and was waiting for a cue. The soil looked... I didn't say disturbed. I didn't say fresh. Abe looked past me, past Ari. "We clean the grounds after the city crew leaves," he said. "Sometimes they do a job by half. People get angry. They think we don't care." His voice had the slightest crack on the word care. He didn't look like a man who cried, but his jaw had that tightness. Ari's thumb worried the mitten hole. She said, "Sometimes things shift." She meant it as a kindness. The radio squawked, and a male voice I didn't know said something like, "Left of the watch house, left of the columbarium, left of the left," and then laughed too softly for it to be funny. Abe ignored it. He set the brass key against the Yale lock like you do when you're a child playing at opening things. The key didn't match the lock size or shape. He pressed, and for no reason at all the shackle trembled under his thumb. Not opened, not closed, trembled. The smell of vinegar metal swelled until it was like biting your tongue. "Okay," Abe said. Not to me, not to Ari. "Enough." He pulled his hand back, and the ring of keys at his belt clanked. Real keys, dull steel smeared with the work of years. He sorted through and found one the right size. "Inside is short," he said. "We cut under the roof. Fog sits above." He slid the key in and the Yale lock turned. The gate swung with a machine-oiled whisper. The hum at our knees rose to meet us like a cold thing pleased to be recognized. Inside, the air felt warmer and wrong. It's a trick, a real trick, how stone spaces hold temperature. My breath didn't fog. Ari's headlamp steadied. Abe held his mag light low so the beam hit the floor, because you never blind your companions. The floor was carved names and dates and money, the accumulation of people who had reputations long before they lost them. The smell of vinegar metal had a top note of something chemical cleaner, as if someone had just mopped. We moved quick. The fog outside pressed against the latticed windows and made the spaces look like old TV snow. Halfway across, my light picked out a rolled plot map on a shelf. The paper was lightly curled from humidity, the edges wrinkled. A pencil lay across it, and the pencil's point was dull and rasped against the paper when I flicked it. Ari slapped my hand with 2 fingers, not hard. "Don't touch anything you don't understand," she muttered. Her voice was so close it became present tense in my head, a here and now. "Don't touch." We hit the far door, and it had a matching Yale lock. Abe got down on one knee, keys in his hand, and that's when the radio spoke my grandmother's name. This time soft, as if Ari had said it into my ear. My stomach clenched. The radio huffed. Then a younger voice said, "He keeps going the same way, it's funny, look." And a second, breathy voice laughed once. Ari's head snapped up. She didn't look at the radio. She looked at the floor like the sound came from somewhere under our shoes. A heavy thump vibrated through the stones, not a door, but earth shifting. I felt it in my ankles. Abe's hand hovered at the lock and shook. Not because he was old, but because something in him hated what he was about to do and was trying to convince him not to. It felt like a moment that asked for a rule. He made one. "We don't answer," he said to me. You don't answer when it uses names. You don't answer if they call from the fog. You don't answer if it sounds like your grandmother. What if it is? I said, and my mouth made a word like a child's because the shadow of the thought came out true. What if she needs— People don't need this, he said, not unkind. His thumb slid the key into the lock. The living need the living. The lock twisted halfway and stopped. The key turned, then ground. The smell of vinegar metal went from undernote to full. Battery on the tongue, pickles left open, the sour press of coins in a pocket after rain. Ari put her palm flat against the door and leaned like she could feel a heart beating beyond it. The hum under our knees was a guitar string. Abe tried again and the key refused to move. He swore under his breath, nothing dramatic. He pulled the key out and it came slick with a thin film-like oil that winked and was gone. He reached for the brass key in his pocket without meaning to. Like a hand goes to the bruise you've forgotten is there. He looked at me, and what I saw in his face wasn't fear but the mirror of it. The flip side that looks like determination plus grief. You can wait here, he said, or you can help me. If you wait, keep the radio off your body and don't answer. If you help, hold the beam steady and don't answer. It will say your name. It will say my name. It will say Aries. It will say the names on these stones. I took the maglite without taking it. My hands had already moved. Aries stepped closer to me and slid her fingers under the strap of the radio on Abe's vest, lifted it off and set it on the floor. The hum made the plastic vibrate. She pressed the transmit button, then looked at me with an expression like an apology and a dare. Maybe make noise, she said. It likes quiet. Abe slid the brass key into the Yale lock because of course he did. He knew it wasn't the right cut, but rightness was a theory, not practice. He turned it like he had turned the real one. The fob on the keychain scraped the door. The movement made the smell hit again. Vinegar metal like open arteries in a factory. The lock rotated like a reluctant person looking over their shoulder. It clicked. The door didn't swing. Aries sucked in air through her teeth, a sound like cloth ripping. Abe applied pressure, pushed, grunted once, and the door gave an inch. The fog outside was a wall. The humming wasn't a note now. It was a layered frequency like different machines out of sync. The forced choice came without words. We could lock the door, stay where the ground under us felt less loud, and wait for the fog to burn off whenever it decided to. Or we could go into the white and trust that the path had turned true while we were inside. The radio crackled with names. An old woman's voice. My grandmother's, said mine. Not like a question, but as if she had just found an old photo and was testing the name out loud to see if it tasted the same after years. The smell rose, fell, rose. Abe chose. He pushed the door open wide enough for a person to fit through sideways. Ari went first. She pulled the headlamp down around her neck so it didn't blind us and stepped into the white, like someone leaving a train onto a platform she'd used every day. She reached back and found my sleeve, pinched the fabric just above my elbow. We walk with the ground, she said. Not with our thoughts. Her palm was surprisingly hot. I went second, half because I didn't want to be the last one holding the door and half because that felt like the kind of position that invites something to touch your shoulder. Abe followed, pulling the door as far as it would go, then letting it fall. It settled with a sound like plaster dust shaken from heavy curtains. Outside the fog had changed and hadn't. It muffled traffic more, turned sirens into yawns. The sodium lamps ahead made a new corridor. We went that way, and I was ready to say we were wrong again when the ground under my shoes grated instead of squeaked, and that, tiny as it was, felt like relief. We hit a run of pines. Ari said good, and I wanted to kiss her mitten and felt ridiculous and human. Abe's breath was loud in his nose. He said left, and this time left felt like left. We passed a stone with fresh flowers and the lemon smell of someone's hand cream came up, a trace someone had left. Naoko. I thought it without meaning to, my aunt's name as a smell and a sigh. The fog thinned by the chapel. Ari tapped her headlamp with one knuckle and it obliged and steadied. The humming stepped back under the ground. The vinegar metal thinned to a nerve memory. And then there was my grandmother's stone again, exactly where it always is, 4 rows before the temple gate, under the camellia. I stopped so fast Abe bumped my shoulder. The soil in front of the base looked churned undeniably. Not a lot, enough. My chest tightened. I took a step forward and my toe hit something. A screw, brass with a tiny notch of mud in the threads. A nameplate screw, the size of the ones that hold small plaques in place. I picked it up because how could I not? It was room temperature and made my palm smell faintly like old keys. Abe took a half step toward me, a hand out, then thought better of telling me to drop it. Ari tugged her mitten off with her teeth and crouched, touching the soil with 3 fingers, her nails short and ragged. "City crew leaves it messy," she said, but the sentence didn't come with conviction. She touched the base of the stone. Her hand came away with a dark streak. She sniffed it, face twisting. "Not oil," she said. "Not sap." Her eyes lifted to the camellia. It was too early in the season for blooms. My phone vibrated again. "Rio, weather sucks, right? You close?" I typed, "Almost there," and then deleted it. My grandmother's name on the stone didn't look different. The dates were the same. The chip at the corner felt the same under my nail. My ear caught a small, private sound, and I realized Abe was whispering names under his breath. Not prayers, but the way you catalog tools in a shed so you can find them again. He said, "Mika, Mr. Tanaka, Mrs. Sato," and the litany steadied the air like adding salt to a shaky hand. Ari stood and rolled her shoulders the other way. "You can go," she said to me, tilting her head toward the gate. "You'll see it this time." I looked at her. "You'll be okay?" She smiled, not a big expression. "We're here, you know. We were here yesterday. We'll be here tomorrow. It's bigger than us until the morning, and then it's small again." Abe nodded once, sharper, his jaw still tight. "Don't think you did something wrong," he said. "Don't think you did something right. Just go." I started to, then turned back and placed the brass screw on top of my grandmother's stone. It looked wrong there, so I moved it to the basin ledge beside the ladle. The key on the chain there, not the same as Abe's M, winked at me. I looked away. We walked 20 steps and the gate appeared, a dark rectangle within the fog, and beyond it the smear of traffic, red lights watery in the drizzle. My shoulders dropped. I didn't realize how hunched I'd been until I stopped hurting. At the gate, a younger groundskeeper in a yellow slicker worked a steel blower that pushed water out of cracks and made puddles shiver. He had a face like all young men who don't know yet they're handsome, and he yelled over the noise. "Absan, the cops came and went, said don't let kids in tonight. You want me to lock the temple side?" The blower smelled like gasoline and damp leaves. Abe held up a hand, turned the Motorola on, listened to static and nothing like it was his favorite song. "Lock the temple side," he said, and the blower guy nodded and trotted off, slicker flapping. His name tag read Daisuke in ink that had run in the rain. Ari tucked her mitten back on and stuck her hand out to me like we were finishing a transaction. I shook it. Her palm felt dry now, cooler. "No shortcuts on fog nights," she said. She pinched her earlobe again, then laughed at herself, a throat sound. "Sorry, habit." Abe squinted at the sky the way sailors do even when there's nothing to see. "It will be gone by morning," he said, tone not confident but used to being believed. He looked at me. "You'll go see your aunt tomorrow, eh? Tell her the camellia will drop heavy this year. She'll know what I mean." I nodded because it was easier than admitting I wasn't sure of anything simple after an hour of walking in circles. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. I stepped through the gate. The white thinned like stretched gauze. Traffic noise filled its place, real and irritating. The smell of frying oil from a food truck on the corner shoved out the metallic vinegar. I walked a block before I looked back. The lamps inside glowed, steady and plain as kitchen lights. I could have kept walking. I still looked a second longer, the way you look back into a room where someone you care about is sleeping. I turned home. When I called Aunt Naoko the next morning, she picked up on the second ring and said, "You smelled like rain when I hugged you last night. Did you go through the cemetery?" "You shouldn't cut through on festival nights." I told her yes, and she said, "Your grandmother would say thank you for visiting her. It keeps everything in place," and she paused. "Your cousin Rio said you texted while you were in there and then didn't send it. You left it like unsaid words." She laughed to make the worry sound like a joke. We talked about Odin and whether the eggs took the flavor right, which is the only thing that matters. Before she hung up, she said lightly, "I think I left the small nameplate screw at the stone last week when I cleaned around it. Could you check later?" I wouldn't want it to go missing. I said I would. I worked. The day cleared the way it always does here. Fog burned from the rooftops by 9. The sky too honest to accept the tricks of the night. By evening, the air was clean enough to smell cold. I took the long way around to avoid the cemetery without admitting that's why I did it. I slept. 1 week later, I went back with flowers. Not on Halloween. A weekday, clear, unremarkable. The sodium lamps weren't on yet. The camellia leaves were still glossy. The soil looked ordinary. The brass screw was nowhere. The basin key had only the ladle on its chain. I breathed out and the air took it without commentary. A nameplate rattled somewhere to my right and I told myself it was wind, which this time it was because the branches moved on my skin. I set the flowers down and bowed. On my way out near the small mausoleum with the Yale lock, I saw Abe under the eaves talking to Daisuke. Abe was chewing peppermint like always. He lifted his hand in a half-wave. He looked solid, unghost-like, like a man you see at the market and nod to. Ari wasn't there? I asked Abe. He said she'd taken a different shift. He said, "Tell your aunt I put extra sand in the vase." I left by the temple gate. It was almost dark. As I turned on the road, a smell hit me, so faint it felt like remembering a taste. Vinegar, then metal, like the edge of a coin on your tongue. It faded quick. Nothing to make a story out of, nothing to call anyone about. I kept walking, passing a drain grate that flashed water dully. Behind the wall 3 times, very slow and patient, something tugged a bell rope I couldn't see. Metal nameplates rattle like teeth when the wind hits just right. By the gate road at St. Petersburg Lutheran Cemetery, the bell rope on the old chapel door twitches once, twice, as if it hiccups. Something in the soil makes a soft settling sound, the way a heavy person shifts on a couch you thought was empty. I'm standing there in a cold drizzle under the sodium lamps that turn everything a dull orange, holding my breath, and the brass key resting in my pocket is too warm against my thigh. I'm 17 and I'm not supposed to be here. Only I am here, because an hour ago my best friend Misha dared me to climb the wall with him. He grinned with that crooked front tooth he never got fixed. Midnight. Over and back, easy. His lighter made that soft click he does when he's nervous. We picked this place because it felt quiet, fenced off from the city's noise. If we're honest, it was also because everyone at school said the cemetery guard sleeps in the watch house with the TV on and won't hear 2 idiots proving we're braver than we are. We drop down inside onto gravel that crunches loud in the stillness. My hoodie already sips up the drizzle. There's a watch house with a frosted window, a chapel with flaking blue paint, the caretaker's shed with a steel fuel can sitting outside. A mag light lies on a workbench visible through the shed window, the big kind that doubles as a club. I tell Misha we should walk a lap and get back out before our courage cools. He says, "Let's go see the old lanterns." He flicks his lighter and shuts it again like a tick. The paths between the graves are narrow and uneven. Under the lamps, the headstones look like small, hunched shoulders. The names are a mix of German and Russian: Birnbaum, Somov, Klein. Each one takes the drizzle differently. The air smells like wet stone and something metallic. We pass a marble angel with half its face worn smooth and a modern columbarium wall that looks, in this light, like a filing cabinet for the dead. I'm playing at being normal, saying things like, "Creepy, but not that creepy," hoping it will become true. At the first bend, the lanterns start. They're iron posts with glass boxes old as any I've ever seen, black forest looking with little brass turnkeys for the wicks. People talk about them like they're useless decoration now, a holdover. But one is lit, not electric, wick fire, actual flame, a little breath of it behind the glass. I stop because the drizzle should smother it, but it's burning steady and soft. Misha leans close, rubs at a circle in the fogged pane. Inside, the brass wick holder is scorched black, and the narrow length of wick rises fat up to the flame. It gives off a faint vinegar metal smell, like old coins soaked in something sour. We look back to the watch house. No one is there to have lit it. The window is empty except for the blue blink of a TV through the frost. Misha says, maybe a tourist thing? Timed lighting for midnight? He doesn't sound like he believes it. 2 lanterns down the path, another one glows to life. There's a tiny tick as the glass warms. I feel my shoulders climb toward my ears. We keep moving. I tell myself it's just bad wiring somewhere, an illusion, but these are bare wicks, not bulbs. I take my phone out for a flashlight and the battery is lower than it should be. My reflection in the glass is a smear. We pass a name, Klein EVA, date of death, October 22nd. On the next row, a Victor Somov with the same date, different year. I pause because in that light the zeros look like open mouths. The lanterns lead us right and then left like runway lights. One flares. Another, a few paces ahead, stirs and wakes. We say nothing now. Our sneakers squish on the muddy path. There's an old bell rope on the chapel door that shifts again, and my scalp tightens. The drizzle is relentless, pinpricking the tops of my ears. And then, as we reach a junction where a black sycamore shades the stones, the wick in the nearest lantern coughs blue and goes out. I watch the coil of smoke ribbon up and vanish. I don't know why that makes my chest feel like someone has taken hold of my ribs, but it does. It's the first thing tonight that acts truly wrong. The wick just won't stay lit. Misha laughs at nothing. Let's not get too poetic, yeah? He flicks that lighter again, shuts it, opens it. He does it until I take his hand. He lets me hold on, which is how I know he's scared too. We reach the caretaker's shed because the lanterns take us there, like breadcrumbs. The door stands open a crack. A Fisker's rake leans inside, teeth wet. The place smells like damp rope, oil, and the sour metal note from the lanterns. The motorcycle-muffled city is far beyond the wall. The watchhouse TV shifts to a canned laugh, distant, comforting, and wrong. I see a pegboard full of keys, each brass tag stamped with plot numbers. One tag by itself is stamped gate. The key hanging from it is older than the others, brighter, like it's been polished by fingers. I take it and tuck it into my pocket. Thief, Misha says in a stage whisper, and that makes me grin for a second because it's so him. Then the grin breaks because at that exact second, someone knocks on the shed wall. Not loud, not dramatic. A knuckle on wood 3 times. I turn, expecting the night guard. But it's a woman, maybe 60, in a floral scarf carrying a plastic bouquet of fake lilies sealed under raindrops. Gates are closed, she says like it's a weather report. Her voice is thick. You boys should not be here. Her eyes snag on my pocket as if she can see the key through denim. Before I can answer, her gaze slides past us and she crosses herself. Someone else has walked into the lane at the far end. A tall man in a black coat with a stiff collar and a beard that's more white than gray. The kind of beard that drinks up rain. He doesn't put his hands in his pockets. He just stands and looks toward the columbarium wall like he's waiting for a bus. The woman says, "Father," with a small nod. He inclines his head back at her, but he doesn't come closer. When I blink, they're both looking in different directions, like 2 actors who don't agree on the scene. Then the lamps wake up again one by one, walking us away from them. I'm out, Misha says softly. Let's bounce. He has that lighter. Click, snap, click. We follow the lanterns anyway because that's what you do when a path lights itself. They pull us to the far side of the cemetery, where an old mausoleum sits like a brick oven. Iron gate locked with a Yale padlock that looks like it's eaten its own rust. The stone steps down to the side door have a sheen of standing water. A faint sound hums under the steps, so low it feels like a burrowed bee. The lantern at the top of the steps flares. The one at the bottom tries to catch, sputters, and dies, leaving a little thread of smoke. That smell again. Sour metal like a coin pressed against a battery. There's a name cut shallow above the door. LEO. Another name with the same date. All the tiny cut numerals shine wet. I rub my sleeve across my face. We should go the same way we came. Misha says sure, but his voice is too bright. He is lying. He starts down the steps, stops, looks back like he's asking for permission. The humming under the stones isn't constant. It rolls in and out like a voice too quiet to understand. I realize I've put my hand on the brass key in my pocket like it's a worry stone. We take the path that circles toward the gate. The gate is high and black with spikes like pencils. On the inside of the gate, a shining chain wraps through, and on the chain is that Yale lock, bigger than my palm. My chest finds air again. I pull the key, it slides into the lock too smoothly. For a second, I think we're saved because the key turns and the shackle pops and the chain sags like a snake. We step forward together and put our palms on the gate bars. Cold wets my skin. The city's sodium pool outside is eerie, flaring edges. A car hisses by on the road. I tug on the gate and it doesn't move. I tug harder, bracing my foot against the stone. Misha says, "Don't mess with it. Don't look like we're breaking out," which is ridiculous because we are literally inside a cemetery at midnight. But he's always been like that, worried about posture when the house is burning. The gate does not open. The chain falls away and drops to the gravel like a dead thing. The lock in my hand feels unfamiliar now, as if it's a different lock than the one that was on the gate. Misha has gone very quiet. I look up and see the watchhouse window filling with a figure. He's broad, with a yellowed mustache and an army jacket, his outline made blue by the TV. He puts a Motorola radio to his mouth and speaks. The sound doesn't carry, but I can read his eyes. They are not angry. They're sorry. Hello, I call. My voice cracks. The drizzle makes dots on my lips. He shakes his head slow. He points down the lane toward the heart of the cemetery, a gesture like pushing a boat away. His radio hisses like a sleeping thing. He taps his wrist where a watch would be. He mouths a word I struggle with because his lips barely move. Then I get it. Dawn. He wants us to wait it out. In here, my spine feels like a zipper pulled too low. Behind us, another lantern catches. Then another. The path that leads where he pointed gathers light like a fuse. The beats of wrongness stack up in memory. At the mislogged grave we passed earlier, the nameplate rattled, though there was no wind. The damp soil on the Bodroff plot had a footprint in it, with too many toes pressed into the mud like a child's hand opened in the wrong place. On a low granite marker near the hedge, someone had scratched "Try not to" and never finished. There are no footsteps around it that are not ours. The woman with the lilies never walked away. The priest didn't check his phone or beard water off his coat. He stood like a cutout. Open grave check, a voice says behind us. Stanislav's drunk humor from last winter's hockey trip. Only it's not Stanislav. It's a grave digger I know by sight. Sergei, his jacket smelling of tobacco and damp earth. He gives us a tired nod and a cough that ends in a wheeze. You kids. He takes a swig from a thermos and grimaces. Sour. Misha says hello automatically because manners survive fear. Sergei walks on toward the chapel as if rain isn't falling. Misha stares after him. He died last spring, he says, so small I barely hear it. Heart thing, remember? They put candles by the gate. He turns his lighter over in his fingers. Click. Snap. The lanterns guide us into the oldest section, where the stones lean like drunks. A wrought iron fence leans with them, ivy trying to eat it. The path broadens into a little square space with a sycamore and low hedges. In the middle of the square is an open rectangle in the ground, neat edges 3 feet deep. No coffin, no boards. Just the smell of wet earth, and in it, a skittering noise like beetle legs. The lanterns burn on all corners of the square. And in the nearest one, the wick climbs and flares and then drops like a heart monitor flatlining. It won't stay lit. I know that if I touched the glass right now, it would be cold. My mouth tastes like metal. Misha says it's a maintenance dig. They're reseeding a stone. But there is no stone waiting, and the shovel leaning nearby is a Fisker's with the flat blade clean. My brain does what it always does to survive. It makes a plan. We wait by the watch house, I say. We sit right under the light. We apologize to the guard and we wait. I step forward first. The lantern on the far corner flutters and brightens. The flame looks sickly, gold gone sallow. I pass the open rectangle carefully and count my steps because counting is a thing that has kept me sane since I was little. I count 12 and then the ground shifts under my heel the way a rug does when someone pulls it. I don't fall, but I look down and see the soil settle. No new footprint, no change I can photograph. Just the subtle sense of a heavy body shifting in the dark below. My heart makes a fist. Misha breathes in sharp. He points toward the ditch. The darkness down there is not empty. It reflects both of our faces very faintly, like looking at a dead TV. I bend without thinking and reach my maglite mind, only I don't have one. It was in the shed. The only light is this bad honey light and the sodium sky. My phone's beam looks thin like a toy, but I cast it into the hole. The phone shows wet dirt, a ripple, and then the beam narrows because the phone is dimming even as I hold it. It is not possible for a battery to drop like that. But it does. The humming under the mausoleum steps grows again, except we are nowhere near the steps. The hum is now a feeling in my belt buckle and the key, which goes from warm to hot. I pull it out and drop it because the heat bites skin. It lands with a sound that is too heavy for its weight. In the pit, something answers that metallic ping with 3 tiny ticks, like someone tapping a spoon against the inside of a jar. Why is it open? I ask like there's a clerk I can argue with. No answer but my own fog. The nearest lantern dies. This time the wick smokes longer, a pale thread that smells like vinegar and pennies. The drizzle gives up pretending and becomes rain, heavy enough to patter. Water tapping leaves, tapping the iron fences, tapping my nerves like fingers. In the distance, the chapel bell rope moves on its own. One small tug, and the dream part of my head whispers the word 3 for no reason I like. And then from behind us, a child's voice says, "Light the rope." It's a girl, no more than 9, hair plastered wet, coat too big. She stands by the angel with the worn face holding a red votive in a glass cup. Who brings a child to a cemetery at this hour? Her cheeks are white, her lips the kind of chapped that splits. She sees my confusion and grimaces with impatience. If you light the rope lantern, the others follow. The way she says rope lantern makes it sound like a brand name. She looks across the square to where the bell rope on the chapel hangs. Where did she come from? I didn't hear feet. It's the wick. It doesn't like rain. You have to show it how. Misha makes a small distress sound. He whispers, "We have to not do what it wants." He's right. Every instinct says that. But the open rectangle is a mouth. I see it that way now. A mouth in the middle of a wet field of teeth. The lanterns are nerves. The wick is a tongue. I swallow. I don't remember deciding to move. I'm suddenly at the chapel steps with the rope between my hands. It's rough, a little slimy. My fingers ache around it. The iron sconce next to the door is cradling an unlit lantern with a wick that looks black and slick. Like a leech. I hear my father's voice in my head. Nonsensical in this place, telling me to keep my elbows in while shooting a hockey puck. I take Misha's lighter. He gives it without making me ask. When I flick it, it doesn't spark. Not once, not at all. The wheel scrapes and my thumb gets a strip of skin shaved off, but the lighter is dead. Behind me, the humming swells. I think my name might be in it. The brass key lies on the gravel where I dropped it, water pooling around it as if the stone is cupping it in a tiny basin. I pick it up because doing something is better than being a shape for something else to move. It burns my fingertips for a second and then cools like someone took their hand off it. The key has ridges down the side I did not feel before. Letters are cut into the head. When I tilt my phone's dying light toward them, the letters are not letters. They are little saw teeth. The key has no name. The girl is gone, which feels like a sentence. I march back to the square because stillness feels like consent. I have a dumb idea and I follow it. I jam the keyhead into the lantern's little brass keyhole. It doesn't belong. It isn't made for that, but it fits. I turn the key and feel resistance like a muscle. The wick rises. The thread of it looks too wet, risky. I take my sweatshirt sleeve and dry it like that will change physics. I pull the lighter again and it gives me one small newborn spark. The wick catches as if that spark had been waiting. The flame is tiny, but there, a little bite mark of light in a field of teeth. Across the square, the next lantern wakes. The flame in ours steadies with a sigh. The wet glass hisses. A third lantern, further down the path, stirs. The open rectangle at the square's center exhales a draft that runs cold across my shins. It wants, I don't know how I know that. Maybe you know that by being near it too long. It wants the wicks. It wants the steps. It wants the rope. It wants us to follow the way it has been showing us. All night. All along. Don't go to it, Misha says. His voice shakes. He is the center of a small circle of visible breath. But the lanterns point forward. The open rectangle waits like a polite host. The drizzle makes the dirt shine. I can either walk toward it and see, or I can do something I will never be able to explain later to myself when I have to live with being a coward. It isn't courage that moves me. It's the knowledge that turning away won't make it stop. It will look for me later. It will find me in the reflection in the black TV, in the underside of a puddle, in the coin taste that comes from nowhere. I pick up the Fisker's shovel because I need a tool that can make a sound. The handle is rough and familiar. I step to the edge of the grave. Misha stays just behind my left shoulder, lighter forgotten in his fist. I jab the shovel down into the dirt wall. It makes a ding like hitting a pipe. I lever, expect collapse. The earth holds. I jab again. The sound changes, less metal, more hollow. The lanterns tilt their flames, a trick of wind looking at what I'm doing. The hum stops entirely. I do not process the silence until Misha whispers, "It's listening." I crouch and put my ear near the edge. The smell rising is penny sour. When I exhale, the breath comes back to me cooler than it left. I hear not words but an articulation. Like a mouth shaping a vowel without voicing it. I say stupidly, "What do you want?" I know better than to offer that. I know better than to use first person. My breath makes fog that descends into the hole and then up again like a rejecting. Somewhere far away, the bell rope gives a small tug in the quiet and juice runs along my nerves. A light behind me pops. The lantern that wouldn't stay lit finally dies again. Its wick gives up a little thread of smoke, pale as a vein. The lantern across from it flares to a crazy brightness and then lowers back to normal. I think of lungs, one failing, one overcompensating. I want to gag. The watch house door opens. The guard steps out now, jacket zipped, radio at his mouth. He doesn't come closer, but he raises a hand and jerks his chin like he's trying to steer a car with his face. He wants us away from the square. He wants us not to choose. He sets the maglight's beam on us, a strong white cone, and in that cone the rain looks like silver lines falling straight. The relief of electric light makes my throat ache. The beam plays across the open rectangle. In his light, the dark inside the hole is not reflective now. It is a textured, granular black like the inside of a kiln. The guard says something into the radio fast. In his other hand is a set of keys that catch and reflect the maglight beam in miniature stars. He tosses me one. It arcs and lands in the mud at my feet with a fat sound. This key is not brass. It is modern, a Yale gate key with clean teeth. It should be the correct answer. I pick it up and hold it like a talisman. The grave exhales. The radio squawks on his shoulder. A woman's voice this time, maybe the dispatcher, calm as a classroom. The word unit dies in static. The guard points at the gate. The lantern nearest it brightens as if endorsing the choice. And here is the choice that splits a person. One road is escape and the other is listening. If we leave now, the story is over, and the thing that wanted us will have to make do with the taste it got. If we stay, it will get something else, maybe just a story to chew, maybe more. I take Misha's wrist and squeeze until he hisses. We go, I say. We go now, we move. The lanterns go with us. The path toward the gate lights in a stagger, like someone is jogging down the line, turning dimmers. The square with the open grave falls behind. But the sound of tapping comes once more. 3 tiny ticks like a spoon against glass, and my shoulders knot. At the bend by the sycamore, I look back. There's someone crouching by the grave. For a second, I think it's the girl with the votive. She has long hair wet against her coat. But it's not a girl. It's a bundle of black like priest's cloth, moving like it weighs more than fabric should. The way it bends reminds me of someone kneeling to lift a sleeping child. The lantern right by it pops and dies. The wick's smoke thread rises. The bundle looks up without a face, and I understand, without knowing how, that some things in this world don't want our attention. They want our obedience. I turn so hard my ankle hurts and I run. The guard has the gate open by the time we get there. He's put his own key in the Yale and turned it twice, and the chain is slack. He steps aside and lets us pass, and I look up into his eyes because I want to anchor on a person. They are bloodshot and kind. He smells like wet wool. He doesn't ask questions. He reaches out gently and takes the old brass key from my fist. I didn't realize I held both. You didn't see it, he says quietly, in Russian. And the way he says it is not a command but a gift. You didn't see it. It will keep you safer if that's the version you carry. I nod because I understand he's offering a line we can both live inside. Behind us, the chapel bell rope gives 3 slow tugs. 1, 2, 3. They are gravity more than sound. The guard flinches once. He puts us outside the gate and we are under the sodium streetlights, which look harmless like kitchen bulbs. He closes the gate and sets the chain in place but doesn't lock it yet. He watches the path through the bars. The rain has softened to needle spray. Misha is shaking, full body, but he's laughing too in a high way that scares me more than the shaking. Don't come back, the guard says. He looks at my hands. Sometimes it wants what holds a key. Does it want me? I ask before I can stop myself. Teenager curiosity kills the cat. He looks at me with pity that is close to love. It wants somebody every night, he says, and then he looks past me at the street, not at us, and adds, most nights it is satisfied with the names. A woman passes carrying plastic flowers under her jacket. She nods to the guard. Her scarf drips. She smells like cold cigarettes in winter. I blink because I recognize the pattern of the scarf from earlier, but the face is wrong. Or my memory is. She never glances at us. The guard pockets the brass key like he never expects to use it, and then surprises me by handing me the modern Yale key with its clean teeth. If you must, he says, give it back in the morning. We walk away with the key heavy in my pocket, and we don't talk. The city feels fake outside the wall, like a movie set with lighting errors. I don't sleep. At 5, I wake Misha dozing on my couch and say we're going back to return the key because I can't stand it near my jeans. He doesn't argue. It's still dark when we get there. The gate is shut. The chain is coiled. There is no lock on it now. Inside the watch house, the TV is off. The maglight sits on the bench. No sign of wool jacket or mustache. We stand there in the quiet with our breaths showing, and it feels like the worst part of the night. The part that makes you feel you've dreamed a thing you can't prove. I slide the Yale key between the chain links like a message. A sodium lamp buzzes and then steadies. Far inside, under the sycamore, a lantern kindles with a tiny flinch of flame. It brightens and steadies. My chest doesn't allow a full breath. We clasp hands without discussing it. We leave it all as we found it, except for the part we'll always carry, that night. Even now, when I pass a puddle and catch my face like a shadow in its skin, I think of the open rectangle reflecting me and spitting my breath back cold. Sometimes at my kitchen sink, rinsing a pan and listening to water tap metal, I hear 3 small ticks like a spoon against a jar, and I turn too fast for no reason I can tell anyone who didn't stand there. And sometimes when it rains hard and the world goes sodium orange, I notice an old wick in a lantern outside a neighbor's gate, trying to do a simple job and failing. Smoking just a little, refusing to stay lit, as if something under the steps nearby is humming and waiting to be shown how. The nameplate on the stone cross rattled like a coin in a jar, even though the air was dead calm between the headstones. Somewhere behind me, the soil let out a slow sigh. The kind sound damp earth makes when you step off it and it remembers your boot a second too late. I turned my mag light and the beam jumped across a row of small plots, catching the corner of a granite lamb. The little girl sat beneath the tall cross, her shoulders hunched, hands tucked under her chin, crying as softly as a kettle about to think better of boiling. I'm 33 and not superstitious, just unlucky. My rental coughed its last breath at the gate of St. Fiacre's near Skibbereen, and I'd stepped inside to get out of the drizzle and call for a tow. By the 5th breath I'd taken in that place, I had the watch house door half open with my shoulder, trying not to slip on the wet slate step. The light inside popped twice before staying on. That tired fluorescent thrum you hear in convenience store bathrooms at midnight. A space heater clicked and failed. On the desk, a battered Motorola radio sat next to a ceramic mug with a cartoon crow on it. The caretaker, a heavy man in a black wool sweater, was already on his feet when I came in. "Ah, you've troubles," he said, clicking his tongue once like he'd decided the severity of my situation by the taste of it. He introduced himself as Padrig and dialed a number from memory on a landline older than I am. "Tow on the way," he said. "Could be an hour. Sit a bit, mind yourself. We're after locking up early. The wind puts a hand in everything." The walk back to the gate took me past a chapel whose bell rope hung still as a vein, and I felt that tiny prickling you get when you realize a space has rules you don't know yet. The lamps here were the old sodium kind, making everything the color of tea at the end of a pot. It was cold enough that the drizzle turned to a lace of frost on the marble and on the iron letters. I was as ready to wait in the watch house as anywhere until I heard it, a soft, hiccuping cry from just to the left of the gate road. It wasn't a cat. It wasn't wind. It had syllables. She sat beneath a tall cross with a ring carved behind it, a Celtic thing that looked like it had leaned into 100 winters. Her coat was white, or it would have been white if not soaked gray with drizzle, and there was a ribbon sliding out of her braid. I went slow, hands up the way you do when approaching a skittish dog. "Hey," I said. "Hey there. Are you lost?" She didn't look up. I glanced toward the watch house, but Padrig hadn't followed me out. I took one step forward, and somehow she wasn't there. Not that she ran. I don't know how to say it without sounding dramatic. The space beneath the cross was empty in the time it takes to blink. I stood still so hard my knees shook. The dirt around the grave had a sugar sheen of frost, and in it were little half-moons of footprints. They ran from the path to the cross. They ended at the stone. I called out, "Hello?" and got nothing but the wet hiss of drizzle. When I looked closer at the base of the cross, I noticed the brass nameplate affixed to the plinth. 2 screws held it, dull with age. The corner trembled every time a truck went by on the distant road. Mered Flynn, it read in small, tidy capitals. The dates were short dashes. The same date for birth and death, 17th of March. I felt my chest tighten as if it was a bad omen, but I kept it to myself and went to fetch Padrig. He listened with one eyebrow raised, and the tone he'd used on the phone slid into his voice. "Children aren't in here after dark," he said. I'd be after knowing. He took a heavy ring of keys from a nail, tested their weight, and handed me a small, pretty one. "This little brass fella is for the side gate in case the tow lad wants to come in. Lock behind him again. No one leaves the big gate open. You hear me?" He had a habit of asking a question and nodding himself through it. He clicked his tongue again. "I'll walk you to the spot." We retraced my steps. The cross stood where it had. The nameplate rattled once in the damp and the ground held the clean crescent prints. Padraig squatted until his knees cracked and touched a finger to one. "Fresh," he said without looking up. "But I've seen worse." He rose with a grunt. "It's the cold that plays tricks. The ground sweats and it's patterns you're seeing." He said it too quickly, like the practiced line you say to keep a stranger calm. The watch house smelled faintly of turf smoke and something else that raised fine hairs under my shirt. It was sharp, metallic, like the inside of a battery that's leaked, with a thin sour note under it. Vinegar and a copper coin pressed to your tongue. It didn't belong to the room. I heard the wires hum when Padraig picked up the Motorola and checked in with someone he called Nora. He was careful with his words. I tried to settle on the wooden chair by the window, watching the orange light smear across rows on rows of stones. The drizzle thickened. The radio hissed. From time to time, a name would rise from the marble and catch my eye. Flynn in 3 places. Then O'Shaughnessy twice. Then Mered again, but on a new stone, the same small letters. My brain does that thing where it latches onto patterns. I got up and leaned closer to the window, following the line of one plot to the next. I didn't notice I'd stood up until Padraig said, "Sit, sit. You're clacking like a spoon." He made tea. It tasted of iron. If I list the rest of the little wrongs, it'll sound like I'm piling it on. Still, the side gate was latched again, though I hadn't touched it. The wick in the hurricane lantern by the chapel refused to keep aflame when I checked it. It drank the match and went dark as if exhaling mightily over it. A patch of earth by a row of flintstones was damp where there should have been frost. A stone near the columbarium bore no name. Just a date, again 17th of March. I told myself they probably buried a lot of people on St. Patrick's Day. I told myself tourists notice stupid things. I kept turning the brass key in my hand, feeling the warmth from my palm flow into it. It had a nick on one side carved like a tiny crescent, or a half moon like the little footprints. At 30 minutes, the radio spat and Nora's voice came through. She spoke softly like someone who smiled when she scolded. "Padraig, there's damp at Flynn again." He looked at me and clicked his tongue so softly it was almost a prayer. "Right, I'll go look." "You stay here," he told me. "Mind the gate if the tow arrives?" "The side one." He tapped the small brass key on my palm and left. I shouldn't have gone outside. The smart thing would have been to sit, pretend the tea warmed me, wait for hazard lights to roll up to the gate and a man named Mick to fix my evening. But the crying started again. Not full on. Just the breathy hiccup like a kid trying not to be more trouble than she already is. It came from the shadow line between the older stones and the newer ones, right where the tall cross stood with its rattling nameplate. I stepped into the drizzle and caught the scent again, stronger this time. Vinegar and metal. It rode low in the air, not wind-borne but rising from the ground. "Hello," I said, and my breath made a ribbon. "It's all right. I'm not leaving you." As I neared the cross, the Motorola clicked at my hip like a cricket. Padraig had left it on the desk and I'd clipped it on without thinking. I glanced down. The dial stayed quiet. When I looked up, I saw the child again. Not straight on. Off to the side, as if she were occupying a corner of the scene my eye didn't favor. She had her forehead pressed to the stone, fingers splayed on the plinth like pale stars. "Hey," I said. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer. The maglite circle pegged her coat and swallowed. I stepped forward. There was the smallest widening of her shoulders like she'd heard me, and then, as if a shadow were a trapdoor, she was gone. Humming came from the chapel steps. It was too low to be a hymn, too regular to be wind, the kind of humming a fridge makes before it dies, or a man makes through his nose when he's reading fine print and doesn't want to admit his eyes are tired. The hair on my arms prickled under the jacket. The smell intensified. Old Penny and sour milk together. I turned toward it. The chapel's side door had a Yale lock with a brass hasp. Behind the steps, stone went down to a storage area where you could see racks of shovels and rolls of turf netting through the bars. Something moved there. A yaw of shadow that didn't match the lamps. I should have called Padraig in that exact moment, but instead I called the child. "Mered?" I said. And when I heard myself say the name I didn't remember deciding on, my stomach dropped. "Is this your place?" The radio popped under my coat. "Who do you have with you?" Nora's voice, but small, as if coming from the far end of a drain. "I don't have anyone," I said. "I thought I saw..." The radio went snow. "There's a thing you do when you're scared, where you make your hands busy to bribe your mind into staying." I checked the side gate like I'd been told. The new galvanized chain was looped through twice and padlocked. I fit the brass key to the smaller gate that could swing out for a hearse and gave it a turn, just to make sure I remembered how it felt. It turned sweet like it had been used 1,000,000 times. Then, for the first time, I noticed the engraving on the bow. A little cross with a ring behind it. I held it under the mag light and said, "Of course." When I slipped it back into my pocket, the smell gusted past and I gagged once, hard. The watch house door was open when I returned. I hadn't left it that way. The light inside strobed once and steadied. I said Padraig's name and received instead a squeal of chair legs and the thump-thump of someone moving quickly around the small room. I leaned into the door, the mag light held low like a club. The radio on the desk twitched in place from a vibration I couldn't hear. On the wall, a framed map of the plots had slipped its wire and hung crooked. No, not hung. It was on the nail, but the nail itself had turned slightly in the wood of the wall, as if the whole building had tipped a fraction. "Padraig," I said again. No answer. The humming rose. It had a key now, an insistent low E that made my fillings ache. I snapped the radio off and on. It stayed dead. The smell seeped from under the door that led to the back closet where the spare tarps and the ledger were kept. The brass key was warm through my jeans pocket. I felt it without meaning to, as if it had shifted and settled along the seam to press itself into my thigh. "Stop messing," I said to no one, to everyone who could be hearing. "Stop it." It almost worked. It made me feel like a guy in control of his voice. Then the crying started again directly behind the closet door. Not loud, not showy. Just a kid trying to breathe through something. I opened the door. The closet wasn't big enough for anyone to be in it. Coils of hose hung like sleeping snakes. The ledger lay open on the shelf, a big book with thick blue lines and little numbers running down the left side. Nothing moved. I started to close the door and the names caught my eye. You'd think a cemetery ledger would be a mess of surnames, but this page had only one repeated there. 5 lines in a neat row in the same hand. Flynn, Mered Flynn, Married Flynn, Married Flynn, and on the 5th line, just the first name with a smudge like something wet had fallen on it. The date was the same on all 17th of March. Then in the margin, a small notation, Sidegate. I rubbed at the smudge and realized it wasn't water. It left a faint penny stink on my finger. When I looked up, the hallway beyond the closet wasn't the hallway. The small window at the end had a shape filling it, a cross with a ring behind it, impossibly proportioned to the frame. I blinked and it was just the corner of the chapel across the lane. I closed the door and felt for the brass key and said out loud, "I hear you." "I'm trying." The decision felt like a coin flip I watched leave my thumb in slow motion. I walked to the little gate, slid the chain back through and turned the brass key in the lock to open it. Immediately the crying hit a new note, closer and relieved like a kid finding the light switch. But not human satisfaction, something else like a breath in a bottle when you unscrew it in a different room than you closed it. I stepped back. There are only a few places inside St. Fiacre's that count as inside. The watch house, the chapel, the mausoleum by the older section, and the caretaker's shed with the steel trimmer leaning like a rifle in the corner. I kept to the path since the frost had gone slick. The sound led me toward the mausoleum. It's a small stone box with a door that looks like a face if you stare long enough. 2 iron vents like eyes and a mouth of a lock. The Yale there matched the one on the chapel. The brass panels had turned green in their creases. When I reached the door, I realized I'd been hearing singing, not humming the whole time. Just the vowel of it. The way a sound can be a note without remembering what song it belongs to. The smell broke over me. Vinegar and iron so strong it tightened my tongue against my teeth. I tried the handle and it moved a hair. Locked. I stared at the key in my hand. No, I told myself. No way. The bow of the key looked back at me. The little cross on it had the ring like the old tomb of someone named O'Driscoll beside me. I slotted it into the lock and turned. It didn't belong to that lock. It had no reason to be right. But there's a category of things that happen sometimes in old places, where the human insistence on order steps aside. It turned. The bolt withdrew with a sound like someone waking up. The door's bottom edge lifted off its winter seal and the smell screamed out of the gap. I aimed the mag light and stepped inside. It was bright enough to see without the torch for a second, which made no sense. The walls were close and stone eats light. Then the battery on the mag light made a tinny sound, something I'd never heard it do, like a throat click. The beam stuttered and steadied. The room had niches with plaques, a bench of stone, and a pile of old tools. The air was wet on my eyelids. My breathing came back to me from the walls in a sidebar whisper. The crying was now a hiccup behind the bench. "Mered," I said, "small in that place." She stepped from behind the bench without any flourish and looked up at me. There's no great horror to her face, no rot, no unnatural twist. She was a child. That made it worse. Wet hair in a braid, ribbon like a snail trail, a coat too thin for the weather. She blinked once and the maglite beam passed through her jars of color and light, like through heavy rain. She looked exactly like you want a child not to look, resigned. She wiped her nose with her wrist. "I need to go," she said, her accent a little off the country, more city. "I keep missing it." "What do you keep missing?" I said. I reached a hand out and then let it drop. "The day," she said. "My day." She pointed past me, and when I turned, the wall was a sheet of names, not plaques anymore, not stone, just a wall that had accepted ink. 5 Mered Flynns in neat rows, the first 4 like the ledger, the last a blank with the place for the date open. 17th of March. "I always get back to the gate when the frost lifts," she said. "And he locks it." "Padraig?" I said, but I didn't mean to. "He keeps everything," she said, and her voice made me think of a hand holding a scarf that wasn't his. "He keeps me here so I won't be on the road." "What road?" I asked, though I knew. "The N71 runs quite close. The sodium lamps made it a river outside, slow orange." "The road where the car is," she said. "Where the ribbon blew off and I went after it." I swallowed. My mouth filled with that metallic taste. "We can open the gate," I said, and I heard how badly I wanted that sentence to do something simple to the world. "I have the key." She looked down. "Not that gate," she said. "The other one." She moved past me as lightly as someone stepping around a sleeping dog and put her small hand on the inside of the mausoleum door. Where the iron met stone there was a smear, an old stain that the maglite jumped away from and then stubbornly back to. It was the color of old vinegar, a thing that had once been red and had made its peace with other colors. I knew it was there for a reason I didn't want to understand. Padraig's voice came like a slap through the radio I'd forgotten I wore. "Don't go in there," he said. "Very calm, very careful. Come back to the house, son, now." He called me son, and I almost barked a laugh. "You can't keep her," I said to no one, and both of them. "It's not yours to keep. She's not her," Padraig said. His voice grew tight. "Do you hear me?" "That's not her." The girl looked at me without blinking. "He keeps everything," she said again. "He keeps names until they fit. He keeps people until they fit. He keeps the other side of the gate on his keyring." I stared at the ring of keys I'd seen in the watch house, the big iron ones that looked like props. The little brass key in my hand felt like it was vibrating with the hum, like it could walk if I dropped it. "This place is for the living," Padraig said through the radio. "Listen to me. All this is for people who know how to keep their names. Come away, mind yourself." The smell thickened. It became a texture more than a scent. It got into my ears. The walls pulsed with it. I pressed my palm to the cold stone to keep myself in the now. "What do you want me to do?" I asked the girl. Her eyebrows knit. "Hold the door," she said, "and don't let him close it." "For how long?" "Until the day comes back," she said. I looked out through the crack of the door into the cemetery. The lamps made calligraphy on the stones. The drizzle had turned to a bright needling that made the air look striped. Behind the mausoleum, motion. A figure moving with the deliberate speed of someone who doesn't run because he can't bear to see himself doing it. Padraig. "Don't," he said, louder now in my ear and then with his own mouth from outside. He stood 5 feet from me and wouldn't step closer, as if a line had been painted on the grass. "You can't hold that door forever." "I can," I said, and put my foot against the interior stone. He watched me like I'd become an animal he couldn't predict. "It's not her," he said again, and there was something in his voice now that cracked through the anger and found the part of me that still believed anyone over 50 knows something you don't. "She's gone. She's been gone. What's left is the name. It will take your name if you leave the door open. It will use you to write it down." The girl's hand tightened on the edge of the door. Her eyes didn't move from the slot to the graveyard. "Please," she said, and the please was so simple it almost killed me. Behind Padraig, someone else appeared with a hood up. Nora, I think, a slight woman with hands wrapped in fingerless gloves. She had a habit of chewing the inside of her cheek. I could see the muscle working. "Let it swing, lad," she said. "Your man's right." She said it softly, like she smiled at you to make the medicine easier. You don't want to keep what keeps. The humming shifted suddenly like a plane changing altitude. The walls near my face blurred like heat shimmer. The brass key in my hand grew hot enough I had to drop it. And when it clinked once against the stone, everything in the mausoleum flinched and came back twice as strong. The key skated to the girl's shoe and stopped there as if to bow. She bent and picked it up. The little cross with the ring winked in the flashlight beam. "Don't," Padraig said, and I truly felt sorry for him. His voice had gone small. "Mairead, don't." She smiled then, just the curl of one side of her mouth. It was the realest thing in the room. She put the brass key to the inside of the door lock and turned it. It had no right to fit. It turned easily. The door side against my boot, and I didn't know whether to lean more or let go. The smell was louder than sound now. Iron and vinegar. Penny and pickle jar, old blood forgotten by everyone who touched it. I closed my eyes and thought of my car on the roadside. Steam rising, hazard lights dead in the drizzle. I thought of the ribbon lifted by a passing lorry's wake and a small hand reaching out for it without calculation or fear. "Let me see," I said to her. Useless words that were all I had. "Let me see." She nodded and I shifted my weight. The door swung a few inches wider. The humming fell to a low conversation you couldn't quite make out. Through the crack I saw the path leading to the side gate and the small shape of a girl running there. A version of this girl in every way but name. Her ribbon intact, her coat bright with frost. Then I saw a car nose in the gate, hazard lights blinking and a man getting out and swearing at the cold. The date on his windscreen sticker meant nothing to me. The month did. March. The inside place and the outside time folded like pages in the ledger. "No," Padraig said, but there wasn't anger left in him. Just a man with too many keys and not enough doors. "Hold it," the girl said, and I did, and the maglite beam wavered with my shaking arms. Nora watched with her mouth compressed into a line, her teeth worrying the inside cheek until she must have tasted blood. The seconds stretched. There's a point when you decide you're going to do a thing until it kills you, and it feels merciful because there won't be another choice to make after that. I leaned. The brass key turned again under the girl's hand and then, with a click like a nail seating into old wood, released. There was no scream or crash or final chord. The humming stopped. The smell sank into the floor as if the place had decided to take it back. The magnesium brightness behind my eyes dimmed. The door settled against my boot with a softness I could have called friendly if I were a bigger liar. The girl stepped away and looked up at me with clear, empty eyes. "Thank you," she said. She handed me the key. It was cool to the touch. She was gone before I could take a breath. I didn't faint. I didn't cry. My body didn't give me any of the concessions I'd have liked. I closed the door with both hands and turned the outside lock twice. Padraig didn't stop me. He stood with his arms at his sides and his sweater dark with drizzle and everything about him saying tired. Nora put a hand on his elbow, and that tiny action felt like the only normal thing in Ireland. "We don't open that one for anyone after dark," he said quietly, and he might have been talking to himself. "We don't hold doors we can't close." He rubbed his face with both hands, and when he pulled them away, the years had taken a step forward. The tow truck's headlights drew a wavering line through the ironwork at the gate. Nora flicked her chin. "That'll be Mick," she said. "He'll be delighted to have to reverse up the lane." There it was in her voice again, that soft pride of making a small nuisance feel like a favor. Padraig nodded at the little brass key in my hand. "You'll give me that back," he said. Not unkind. I handed it over, and the brief touch was enough for me to feel the fine tremor in his fingers. He clicked his tongue once, a habit coming back to him like something that had been dropped and retrieved. "Come on then, son. Let's get you off." I didn't argue. The path to the gate had turned slippery. I looked down out of instinct to see where to place my feet, and saw a scatter of half-moons in the thawing frost, small and precise, leading away from the cross to the side gate. They paused once, like a kid had turned to check if someone was coming, and then carried on. The nameplate rattled once in a new breeze, flat and businesslike. Mick swore in a friendly way about my car and told me I owed him a pint, and I promised him too. We stood by the side gate while Padraig unlooped the chain and let us out. His hand on the lock was brisk, practiced. I got in the tow truck cab and the warm air came on slowly, smelling of dog and diesel. As we pulled away, I glanced back through the rain-blurred window and saw Nora engage the chain again, her mouth moving as if she were counting links. Padraig took the little brass key off the ring and slipped it into his pocket, separate from the others. Dawn didn't so much come as change what color the drizzle was. The fields beyond the walls flattened into gray. Mick chatted about football and about a funeral he'd towed a horsebox past once, and I let his words wash over me like a blanket. When he dropped me at the garage, he banged the doorframe twice with the heel of his hand, in a way that felt like an old superstition he'd learned and never questioned. I checked into a small guest house and slept like I'd been pulled under. After noon, I walked back up the road because I didn't know what else to do. The lamps were off. The cross stood in sensible daylight. The watch house door was shut. Padraig sat on the step with a sandwich in his hand, and he nodded at me like neighbors do. "You got sorted," he said. I told him yes. He chewed and looked down the lane. "You mind yourself," he said. "You don't have to come in." "I know," I said. I didn't, but I did eventually. They let me stand by the fence and read the names as if they were pieces of music. Flynn in 3 rows. O'Shaughnessy twice. Mered with a date that matched the others. On the tall cross where I'd first seen her, the brass nameplate sat flush with the stone. The screws had been tightened. I touched the head of one with a finger and my skin came away with the faintest smell of old metal and something sour, like a kitchen where someone had just pickled onions. A thin breeze picked up under the sodium lamps that were off now, but still held their ghost color in their glass. Far away, some small sound you'd miss if you didn't listen repeated itself with patient insistence. The plate ticking gently on the cross as the day warmed the metal. 1, 2, 3, and then silence like the breath taken between tries.